Dumb rules that exist for smart reasons. The sliced bread ban. I know, shocking, right? I didn't believe it when I heard it either. Mainly because every time you hear about sliced bread, it's always within the context of how amazing it is. Which I find a bit ironic because it seems like most people hold the invention of sliced bread in higher regard than the invention of actual bread. You know, the food that literally sustained humanity for generations. That's besides the point. When sliced bread came out, it was one of the biggest inventions of all time, at least according to catchphrases. But did you know that there was a period of history, albeit brief, where the United States government literally banned sliced bread? Let me explain. The entire sliced bread saga dates all the way back to 1912, when a man named Otto Frederick Rohwedder created the first prototype for an automatic bread slicer. Although this prototype would stay exactly that for a few years. And unfortunately, only 5 years later in 1917, a fire at his warehouse not only destroyed his bread slicing prototype, but also destroyed all of the documentation around it. That includes the blueprints, the spare parts, the other versions he was working on. Literally everything associated with this initial prototype was destroyed in a fire, delaying one of the best inventions of all time by another decade. 11 years later in 1928, with the help from the Chillicothe Baking Company in Missouri, Otto's invention was finally able to get picked up off the ground. Not only were they beginning to use this prototype machine, but they also claimed, quote, this was the greatest step forward in the baking industry since bread was wrapped. Meaning that even back then, nearly 100 years ago, people were so enthusiastic about bread innovation. The start of the sliced bread craze was slow, but after a few years and many large-scale marketing campaigns, sliced bread was a household staple by the 1930s. And by the late 1930s, it was a necessity in every household. And it was also around this time when Wonder Bread was invented. You know, the bread that literally looks like printer paper. But of course, this video isn't about the history of bread, and we've already discussed what the dumb rule was, so what was the smart reason for this weird ban? And without giving too much away, let me just say that this ban took place in 1943, a time when World War II was in full effect, and the United States of America was heavily involved. It shouldn't come as a surprise that during World War II, rations were a way of life to ensure that there was proper availability and supply chain to supply our troops overseas with everything they needed to, in this case, kick some Nazi butt. But these rations came with a price. Besides the inherent restricted lifestyle experienced by everyday Americans, there was also frequent unexpected shortages. For example, sugar or rubber tires running in short supply. And it was because of this that the American government was becoming more and more anxious about not having the proper supplies or supply chain to fund one of the most important wars of all time. And it was actually this anxiety that led to the banning of sliced bread. On January 18th, 1943, Claude R. Wickard, the head of the War Foods Administration, declared that selling sliced bread was illegal. His rationale for this was because sliced bread required thicker wrapping paper to stay fresh. And he argued with the banning of sliced bread that more wax paper would be available, once again, for the troops overseas. But not only would we save wax paper, but we would save steel that would otherwise go to the production of new bread slicing machines. Now, admittedly, I can kind of see both sides of this because A, this definitely sucks and seems extremely arbitrary, and I feel like there's other corners to be cut. But at the same end, when you are literally fighting in World War II, I think there is no better expression than desperate times call for desperate measures. But with that being said, this ban on sliced bread was definitely not met with acceptance, and almost instantly there was public outrage, specifically among housewives in America, who at this time in many cases were expected to be not only single parents, homemakers, and also full-time factory workers to ensure that the labor force didn't collapse. When these women learned that one of their newest luxuries was going to be taken away from them, they were understandably upset. And there was even a famous quote that was written in a letter to the New York Times only a week after the ban took place. The quote goes as such: "I should like to let you know how important sliced bread is to the morale and the saneness of a household. My husband and 4 children are all in a rush during and after breakfast. Without ready sliced bread, I must do the slicing for toast, 2 pieces each. That's 10. For their lunches, I must cut by hand at least 20 slices for 2 sandwiches apiece. Afterwards, I make my own toast. That's 22 slices of bread to cut in a hurry." That is only one example from one woman, but it paints a picture of how the American people were feeling at this time, coupling not only the annoyance of sliced bread being banned, but also all of the other rations taking place and a literal world war happening overseas. And it was because of all of the public outcry that only 3 months after the ban was introduced, the ban was appealed and sliced bread was once again legal in the United States. I wanted to add this entry very first on the list because I thought the concept of sliced bread being banned was so funny. And while I think we can all agree that this was definitely a dumb rule, I would hope that at least most of us could agree that there was definitely a good reason for this rule. Specifically, doing everything humanly possible to ensure that the Americans and the Allies destroy one of the most evil regimes to ever exist. But let's keep moving. The bear wrestling ban. This rule is dumb not because it seems nonsensical or arbitrary, but because why is this rule even required? Anybody with half a brain and potentially somebody with even a quarter of a brain would understand not to wrestle a bear, right? Well, apparently not people in Alabama in the 1970s. Let me explain. I don't know about you, but when I first read this ban, I instantly envisioned a person walking into the woods, finding a bear randomly, and then wrestling it. But that is not at all what was happening and not what caused this ban whatsoever. The good reason behind this seemingly obvious rule is actually pretty upsetting. During the 1970s, 80s, and even 1990s, bear wrestling was an extremely popular part of circus culture in the United States. And it's also no surprise that these animals are typically not treated well. But potentially one of the poorest treated animals in the entire show was the bear, specifically meant for wrestling. Just for a moment, imagine you're the leader of a circus and you want to have a spectacular bear wrestling act in your circus. How do you go about achieving this safely? Do you A, scrap the idea because this seems unsafe and immoral? B, train a bear to wrestle safely so it can put on a show but also keep your performer safe? Or C, torture, drug, and mutilate the bear until the point that it is so limp and brain dead that literally anybody with a pulse could wrestle it successfully? The answer is obviously C, and that's exactly what happened. Ringleaders knew that they couldn't risk having their talent hurt or killed because that would affect profits. And they also knew that training a bear would take too long. So the porridge that was just right was to literally feed the bear a consistent chemical cocktail to keep them subdued, remove their teeth and claws so they had no opportunity to fight back, and on top of both of these things, consistently torture the bear and keep them malnourished in between shows so that the bear is consistently weak and in a state of fear, meaning that it would rather cower than actually fight back. And one of the most disgusting examples of profiteering off this act was not only having circus staff wrestle these bears for a show, but they would actually sell people in the crowd access to wrestle the bear to look tough. And you just know if that a ringleader felt so confident to have anybody at the circus wrestle their bear, they were messing up the bear so much that there was no way it could hurt anybody. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these bears should have killed fans or circus employees. I'm just saying they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And that's not even mentioning the extremely questionable methods the circuses used to acquire these bears. And of course, these bear wrestling matches didn't just happen once or twice. They were so prevalent that states had to create their own laws banning them. For example, Alabama made bear wrestling a Class B felony, and this law passed only in 1996, after a lot of the damage was already done, but I guess better late than never. But interestingly, this law was repealed a decade ago in 2015, not because they wanted to bring back bear wrestling, but because the law was no longer necessary. Circus culture had died down significantly, and bear wrestling was officially a thing of the past. And quite frankly, this law was more or less of a publicity stunt than a traditional piece of legislation. Obviously, this was an enforceable felony, although it was stated that the creation of this law was more or less of an act aimed to support animal welfare and public safety. But yeah, upon a first listen, hearing that wrestling bears is now banned seems redundant and weird. But when you actually learn the story of it, it makes total sense. The dissection debate. This is actually the first rule we're going to discuss that doesn't ban something, it actually allows something. But be warned, this one is pretty morbid. The dumb rule that is in play here is known as the Autonomy Act of 1832, and this rule states that doctors, teachers, and medical students in Britain can legally dissect the bodies of unclaimed dead from warehouses, prisons, and hospitals. Upon a first listen, that not only sounds dumb, but also sounds pretty immoral. Like, just think about it. If somebody dies in prison or in a hospital and they can't find a living family member, which it probably wasn't easy to find a living family member in 1832, the body was essentially just up for grabs to any doctor, teacher, or medical student. That to me sounds like a slippery slope and a lot of room for a lot of malpractice, to say the least. But believe it or not, this dark and dumb rule actually saved a lot of lives. See, prior to the Autonomy Act, the only way that doctors, teachers, and medical students could dissect a body was if the government gave these individuals the body of an executed criminal. This, for a long time, was standard practice. Somebody breaks the law, they get killed for it, and the body gets essentially donated to science. But issues began to rise when in the 18th and 19th centuries, medical schools needed more and more cadavers to not only teach, but learn more about the human anatomy. And it was with this rise of education and bodily exploration that the supply of these bodies were nowhere near the demand. And unfortunately, this gap in the market led to some very unethical practices. One of the main side hustles that was born out of this shortage was something known as body snatching. And it would go a little something like this. If you were a poor individual living in the slums of London and needed to get a few bucks, an easy way for you to get some quick cash is to take a shovel, wait till it's nighttime, and then go to the nearest graveyard. Dig up any body that was freshly buried and take it to any of the local universities. You know that these universities have money, and you know that they need bodies. So a lot of these universities were, at this point in time, willing to pay cash money for bodies, no questions asked. And it only got worse when people decided that they could optimize on this strategy. And by that, I mean that these body snatchers decided that they would just cut out the middleman. Why go dig up a dead body if you could just make a dead body? And by that, I mean people would literally just kill people and then take the body of their murdered victim directly to the university for cash money. This was more or less of the peak of body snatching. And when this specific story broke and spread across all of Britain, the government knew they had to do something. And it was at that exact moment when the Autonomy Act of 1832 was established. So while it may seem odd that any unclaimed undesirable can just be donated to science against their will, I think the rule makes a lot more sense once you realize that a lack of bodies was not only creating a scientific bottleneck, but was also creating a nationwide trend of grave robbing and eventually murder. This dumb and morbid law actually had a pretty good reason, especially considering the time frame. Like in the 1800s, there was nowhere near the medical standards that there are today. The tiger selfie ban. Yep, we're back to animal bans. But this one is really peculiar. In 2014, the state of New York effectively put a ban on taking selfies with tigers and any other big cats. I think to most of us that sounds pretty dumb, but the reason why they did this makes a lot of sense, and it's actually quite short. The government of New York was getting so many copyright complaints from tigers from people who were taking pictures of them and selling them without giving proceeds to the tigers. And because the government of New York did not want to deal with any more lawsuits from tigers over copyright disputes, they decided to outright ban selfies altogether. That was obviously a total lie, I just made it up. Here's the real scoop. New York didn't necessarily ban taking selfies with tigers. What they did do was specifically ban any member of the public being near any dangerous animal in a circus, zoo, or carnival that is not in a safe and confined cage. And while it may seem like I'm reaching here, the purpose of this ban, keeping people and dangerous animals separated, was specifically inspired by the rise of tiger selfies. During the early 2010s, the dating app Tinder saw a massive surge of men on the platform using pictures of themselves next to tigers as one of their profile photos. And this trend was so prevalent, in fact, that the Wall Street Journal estimates that 1 out of 10 people had a photo with a tiger on their Tinder. Obviously, these men wanted to seem tough and adventurous, but in reality, all they were doing in most cases was contributing to animal exploitation. And when this was all brought to the state of New York, they not only recognized it, but sought to put an end to it. And how they went about it was, of course, the tiger selfie ban. Because no, you can't ban taking a picture with an animal, but you can ban people from being around these dangerous animals. And this ban was pretty effective, considering the New York government knew that all these men that were taking these pictures to look tough knew that they wouldn't look nearly as tough if the tiger was in a cage behind them. And this ban was honestly pretty genius, because these people that were taking pictures with tigers and lions to look tough wouldn't want to have photos of them with a tiger in a cage, because then they wouldn't look tough at all. It would just look like they're taking a selfie at the zoo, completely nullifying the trend, helping mitigate animal exploitation. Similar to the ban of bear wrestling, tigers or lions or jaguars or any big cats that were specifically used for photo ops were not well taken care of in the slightest. A lot of these poor cats were bought young, taken away from their mothers, and for basically all of their life treated poorly and used as a toy and a means to earn profit. When this trend was on the rise in the early 2010s, people were booking all kinds of big cat experiences. Tiger kitten play date, tiger kitten photo op, lion photo op, have a lion at your wedding. Anything you could have imagined, people were buying lions specifically with the purpose of pimping them out at public events to have them look cool. And obviously, if you're bringing a big cat to a public setting, the cat has to be extremely subdued, or in some cases, tortured, malnourished, declawed, defanged, drugged, and the like. And if you ever watched that documentary Tiger King, then you kind of get the idea of the dark business behind the whole big cat picture industry. And just like how Alabama wanted to stop the exploitation of bears, New York sought to stop the exploitation of big cats, which they did with their 2014 tiger selfie ban. A seemingly dumb rule with, in my opinion, a pretty smart plan of attack. The kitty cat cigarette ban. Okay, I swear, this video isn't a Trojan horse for me to get on my vegan soapbox talking about animal cruelty. But coincidentally, there has been a lot of interesting laws surrounding animals, but for the sake of repetition, I'll keep this one brief. Similar to the second law we discussed, this ban isn't dumb because it seems arbitrary, it just seems extremely, well, redundant and nonsensical. The ban I'm specifically referring to is the ban that Illinois placed on handing your pet a nicotine stick. To put it bluntly, in Illinois, it is explicitly stated that it is illegal to, quote, give a lit cigar or cigarette to a cat, dog, or other domestic pet, including ball python. And that's essentially the entire law. You cannot give a lit cigar or cigarette to your cat, dog, domestic pet, or there explicitly stated ball python, because of course everybody's giving a lit cigar to their ball python. It's reported that this law comes from the early 1800s and by today's standards is relatively outdated, which I would agree with. But I wanted to mention it quickly because it, more than anything, just kind of sounded funny. And also just makes you think, how often was this happening if the state of Illinois had to not only recognize it, but ban it? Obviously, the good reason behind this dumb law is to prevent pets from unintentionally burning themselves or even setting themselves on fire or potentially even trying to smoke and getting addicted. It was believed that this law was put into place as a general effort to prevent animal cruelty, which is obviously something that's completely reasonable. Although this law is just kind of notable and, in my opinion, hilarious because of how specific it is. The fact that legislators in Illinois had to explicitly exclaim and write with a quill in ink that no lit cigar or cigarette shall be given to any domestic pet, including cats, dogs, hamsters, and ball pythons, to me is hilarious and noteworthy, and we're gonna move on, but I just wanted to share it. And if you were curious, yes, this law is still active today. The no spitting sanction. First and foremost, get your mind out of the gutter. Now let's move on. I think we can all agree that if you see somebody walking down the road just spitting on the sidewalk, it's definitely not polite and pretty gross. But is it something that's worthy of a ban? Well, unless it becomes some sort of national trend, I don't see it as something worthy of government intervention. However, there was a time when the United States government decided that it was in their best interest to ban any form of spitting in any public area. And this wasn't one of those obscure laws with a deeper meaning like some of the other ones we've discussed. No, this was a straightforward law that was not only written and passed, but also had signs placed everywhere reminding individuals and also had strict enforcement. But the question remains, what was the smart reasoning behind this dumb rule? And the answer, as some of you might have guessed, is health related. During 1918, during the last year of World War I, many cities across the United States were dealing with a major Spanish flu pandemic. This pandemic was extremely deadly and the spread of this disease was seemingly never ending, which is why the US government was pretty desperate to do anything that could potentially stop the spread. During the time of the Spanish flu, over a century ago, health officials believed that diseases like influenza and tuberculosis were spread through saliva droplets. And it was because of this belief that they held that would later essentially be found true, they decided that their best course of action to help prevent the spread would be to minimize the creation of saliva droplets, which meant no spitting, specifically in any public place. Sidewalks, trains, theaters, anywhere. If you were caught spitting, you would be fined and potentially even arrested, which is just crazy to think about now. But during 1918, during the Spanish flu pandemic, I wouldn't want to even be in a public place, let alone spitting in one, making this seemingly dumb rule make a lot more sense with context. And speaking of context, let me give you guys some context about how many of you are actually subscribed. YouTube literally tells me that over 75% of you watching this right now aren't subscribed. So I just wanted to say, if you're enjoying this video or even watch me regularly, consider hitting the subscribe button and being a bro. I post new videos every single Friday, and we are currently on the road to 1 million subscribers. Oh, and if you like this topic of dumb rules with smart reasons, simply leave a like or leave a comment below telling me you want a part 2. I love making the videos that you guys want, so if you want a part 2, let me know and I'd be more than happy to make it. But now, let's get to the final entry on this list. The bubblegum ban. Chances are, if you've heard of any of the dumb rules on this list, it's this one. And that's because this country's gum ban is extremely infamous. And I would actually bet money that you know the country that has this gum ban. And if you guess Singapore, you'd be right. The whole bubblegum ban in Singapore is regarded as one of those dumb laws or arbitrary laws, but the actual history behind this bubblegum ban is very much so rooted in the history and culture of Singapore. And in my opinion, has some pretty good reasoning behind it. The origins of this ban date back to 1959. When Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, took office. Lee Kuan Yew is considered the founding father of modern-day Singapore, and it's said that his political leadership is what transformed post-independent Singapore into a highly developed country in the major global hub that it is today. Lee Kuan Yew was literally Prime Minister from 1959 until 1990. That is a major run as Prime Minister. But for 2 years before and after he was Prime Minister, he was also the Secretary General for the People's Action Party. To put it bluntly, this guy was invested in the success of Singapore. But I want to make it clear that I'm not necessarily advocating for Lee whatsoever. Like any politician or any person, there is both good and bad that must be recognized. And with any multi-decade-long run as Prime Minister, there is definitely some questionable things that go on. For example, from 1968 to 1981, Singapore, under the control of Lee, instated a one-party state. And because of this, he employed defamation laws and detention without trial, as well as other propaganda and and social engineering techniques to continue his political success. So just keep that in mind. I'm not necessarily vouching for this guy. I'm just trying to unbiasedly state facts about the country. And two of the virtues that Lee held nearest and dearest to his heart was independence and cleanliness. And Lee has even gone on record to state that his goal when he became the Prime Minister of Singapore in 1965 was to, quote, create a first world oasis in a third world region. And he wanted to do so through hyper-independence and, of course, cleanliness. The gum ban specifically was introduced in 1992. It was done so for a plethora of pretty practical reasons. On top of Lee's personal desire to keep the country as clean as possible, chewing gum was actually becoming quite a bit of a nuisance within Singapore specifically. Gum wrappers were littering the streets, chewed gum was stuck on any surface you could imagine, and most notably in the late 1980s, when Singapore launched its Mass Rapid Transit or MTR subway system, vandals began to place chewing gum on the sensors of the train doors, causing them to not open or not close when they should have. And this vandalism at scale caused major subway delays, affecting the lives upon thousands and thousands of Singaporeans. And it was this stunt that broke the camel's back and officially led to the banning of chewing gum. But like everything else they've mentioned, it goes a bit deeper than that. Because this ban on chewing gum isn't just about banning minty fresh breath or keeping the subway system on time. Culturally, this ban signified Singapore's philosophy of having a strict government that enforces strong discipline. And the government saw this chewing gum vandalism as an act of rebellion from its citizens. And with the Singaporean government being as strict as it was and is, they decided that they were not going to play games and they wanted to ban it outright. But this ban was twofold, because sure, they wanted to show their civilians and the world that they ruled with an iron fist, but these acts of vandalism also gave them reason to keep the country that much cleaner. Something that a lot of people don't know is that while gum is banned in Singapore, it's not the only odd thing that's banned. Any form of litter is banned, any form of graffiti is banned, jaywalking is banned, spitting is banned, expelling mucus from your nose is banned, and urinating anywhere that is not a toilet is also banned. Oh, and if you use a public toilet, you are legally required to flush it. And while most of these things are not legal or accepted in other places, it just goes to show that with these specific legal bans, how serious Singapore is about public cleanliness and orderliness. And the chewing gum ban was only an addition of this already ongoing cultural movement. After this seemingly dumb and pretty arbitrary rule was put in place in 1992, many foreign journalists went specifically to Singapore to talk to Lee and question him about the seemingly nonsensical ban. And in every interview, Lee simply defended his point, claiming that you do not take a country from being a struggling country in a, quote, third world region to being a first world oasis without having strong rules, strong discipline, and ruling with an iron fist. Lee has even gone on record to state, quote, "We were called a nanny state, but the result is that we are today better behaved and we live in a more agreeable place than 30 years ago." And when one reporter tried to press Lee claiming that banning chewing gum could be banning the creativity of some individuals, Lee simply said, quote, "If you can't think because you can't chew, try a banana." I have no personal opinion on Lee or the country of Singapore, and I personally don't think I'd want to live in a country with such strict rules. Although it's hard to argue against the political career of Lee and the success that Singapore has had in such a short period of time as a result of some of these seemingly dumb rules. Things that got banned because one person ruined it for everyone. Last meal larceny. It's no secret that even the worst people on this earth still get the opportunity to have a nice meal before they go. The American tradition of offering a last meal to people on death row has been going on for a long time. However, did you know that in most prisons, last meals are not nearly as customizable or as extravagant as they once were? Let me explain. Now, the tradition of a death row last meal is definitely most common in the United States. However, this tradition is actually rather old, predating both the United States itself as well as the entire Christian religion. You see, for thousands of years, across almost every culture in the entire world, it was customary to give those a last meal who were set for death. The reasoning for this in ancient times was rooted in fear, specifically the fear that the spirits of the executed would come back as hungry ghosts if the deceased individual was not properly fed before their execution. That alone is kind of hilarious, considering they're more scared that they will come back to haunt them because they were well fed, rather than, literally executed. But regardless, it's made its way through history in different civilizations and empires until it got to the modern day. For example, the Greeks would give their soon-to-be executed prisoners a final meal because they believed it was necessary for the dead to cross over into the underworld. And because they didn't want these individuals to return to haunt the overworld, they would give them a proper meal. And not too differently, in ancient Rome, they would give not only their criminals, but also gladiators large meals before the days of their fights in case they happened to have an injury or death during the games, ensuring that they crossed over to the other side without fault. And already, it's kind of seeming like the ticket to heaven is, well, a good meal. Now, focusing back in on the United States, for example, the last meal tradition made its way into the American prison system in the early 1800s. However, this practice was finally formalized by several states in the early 1900s, with different states having their own rules, with Texas being a notable example, specifically because in every state the rules varied on what the meal could be. Most states that offered a custom last meal had certain rules. For example, in Florida, your meal could be whatever you wanted as long as the ingredients were purchased locally and didn't cost more than $40. And in Oklahoma, for example, the cost limit is only $25. And in Louisiana, of all places, typically during the last meal, the prison warden will join the prisoner for this last meal, which I could only imagine is a tense dinner. But interestingly, out of all of the places that offered a last meal, Texas was notable for being one of the most generous. Prisons would typically offer large requests, not setting extremely harsh budgets on the food. This, I'm sure, was appreciated by inmates on death row. However, it didn't take long for Texas to go from being a generous state to being a state that didn't offer custom last meals at all. And the reason why the state of Texas changed this rule is because of one individual. Lawrence Brewer, like basically everybody on death row, was not a good person. But Lawrence Brewer specifically was notably bad. Without getting too much into graphic detail, the reason why Lawrence Brewer was on death row was because him and two other individuals pulled a man named James Byrd Jr. from the back of their truck after brutally assaulting him, dragging him to his death simply because of his skin color. This hate crime and murder, fortunately, was punished to the fullest degree, although it's extremely disgusting that it even happened in the first place. With that being said, even though Lawrence was on death row, he was still honored a last meal. And for this meal, he requested something extravagant. And the order goes as follows: 2 fried chicken steaks, a triple patty bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, a bowl of fried okra, a pound of barbecued meat, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, a pint of ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beers. Surprisingly, the Texas prison system generously honored this rather extravagant request. However, in retaliation, once Lawrence was presented with this food, he didn't take a single bite. He pushed the plates away and simply said, "I'm not hungry." After it became obvious to the prison guards that he was not going to eat, he was taken back to his cell and the food was, I'm assuming, thrown away or potentially eaten by some very hungry prison guards. And if that was the case, honestly, I'm just glad it didn't go to waste. Unsurprisingly, once the news broke that not only was this disgusting inmate offered such a generous meal, but he didn't even touch a single bite of it, it didn't only make headlines, but it boiled the blood of prison officials in Texas. And it was because of this stunt by Lawrence Brewer that the Texas prison system instantly changed the rules, no longer offering any custom meals to anybody on death row. From when this happened in 2013 until the present day, if you are set for execution in Texas, your final meal is no longer whatever you want. It's whatever the cafeteria has that day. And while this isn't really the most upsetting story considering who this affects, people literally being killed by the government because what they did was so horrible, but it is still a pretty interesting example of one person ruining the last piece of fun people on death row could have. This may seem like a tame start because it literally only affects inmates on death row. And you're right, and that's because this video is only going to get more and more crazy as it goes on. And by crazy, I mean affects more and more people. So let's move on. The touchdown shutdown. I love sports. They're fun to play, they're fun to watch, they're fun to learn about. All around, sports are just a great thing that bring people together. But admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of professional sports. I just don't watch it a lot. But when I do watch professional sports, one of my favorite parts of it are the extracurriculars. Fights in hockey, trash talk in the NBA, the hilarious flops in soccer, halftime shows, and of course, touchdown celebrations. But did you know that in American football specifically, there was a touchdown celebration that was so prolific that it actually got banned from the entire NFL? Well, if you do, you're gonna hear about it again. But if you didn't, let me tell you a crazy story. If you're a fan of American football, then the name Jimmy Graham is probably not unknown to you. Jimmy was born in 1986 in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and was drafted into the NFL in 2010 by the New Orleans Saints. Throughout his career, Jimmy played for the New Orleans Saints, the Seattle Seahawks, the Green Bay Packers, and even the Chicago Bears. And during his football career, he was not only known for his athletic ability, but also his unique touchdown celebration, with the most iconic being his football dunk on the goalpost. In case you're unfamiliar, almost every time Jimmy would get a touchdown, he would literally take the ball, run into the goalpost, and dunk it over the post, essentially like he was dunking a basketball. This, admittedly, was pretty badass looking, although it came with consequences because he was doing it so much, and it looked so cool that the NFL decided that no one man could have all that aura. I'm totally lying. If you look at this clip right here, you can see that after he dunks the ball, he literally bent the goalpost. And this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Obviously, when one of the most foundational components of a sports field is, well, broken or at least misaligned, it has to be fixed instantly for the games to continue. And in the case of the goalpost being fixed after a dunk, these fixes were known to pause the game for anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes. And while these delays may seem minor, when you're talking about professional, live, televised sports, anything that throws off the schedule to that degree that isn't planned for is a major headache for networks, advertisers, and the league in general. It was for this destructive reason that the NFL ended up banning the dunk on the field goal, which in my opinion kind of solidified this move as one of the coolest touchdown celebrations ever, even though it was pretty disruptive and I'm sure really annoying for people actually working the game, and probably even watching too. And while this is once again more of a niche rule that doesn't affect too many people, I would definitely argue it at least affects more people and likely also had a trickle-down effect. Because imagine if you were growing up watching Jimmy Graham play football and your goal was to grow up playing the NFL and dunk yourself. If that was your goal in life and then you heard that dunking was banned, you probably just had one of your biggest dreams crushed. And while sure, you could probably dunk in amateur leagues, if the goalpost is being bent in the NFL, I can only imagine what would happen if you're dunking on amateur league nets. And I wouldn't be surprised if people dunking at home injured themselves or broke goalposts altogether. But yeah, Jimmy Graham not only made his own touchdown celebration, but used it so much he got it banned. And well, the rest is history. The sushi situation. I've never been to Japan, but it's definitely extremely high on my bucket list of places I want to go. The culture is so cool, the landscapes are beautiful, and the technology is just interesting. Obviously, here in the Western world, we enjoy a lot of Japanese technology, but over in Japan, they're still gatekeeping some of their coolest stuff for themselves. Most notably, in my opinion, the food conveyor belt. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you where I first saw or heard of this, but I just remember seeing people sitting at a restaurant and food coming to them on a conveyor belt and just being so enamored by it. Initially, I questioned why Golden Corral didn't get this instantly, but then I thought to myself, well, if Golden Corral had this, they would probably have to install wider doors so people could leave. But focusing back on the point, these food conveyor belts are relatively popular across Japan. However, in one popular sushi chain in the Gifu Prefecture in Japan, the conveyor belt was not only cancelled but replaced with a cartoon version, all because of the acts of one individual. It was a regular day near the beginning of 2023. People were enjoying their food at the Shishiro restaurant in Japan. This restaurant obviously was known for its conveyor belt system. However, on this now infamous day, a 17-year-old boy walked into the Sushiro restaurant and sat at a table. During his stay, he had the very dull idea to film himself licking soy sauce bottles and teacups and even sushi and putting them back on plates, sending them down the conveyor belt for other people to have. Now, this disgusting video went viral, and seemingly overnight, this video had over 40 million views and was being posted on news outlets everywhere, seemingly exposing the vulnerability of this honor-based system. You know, having the honor to not mess with other people's food. To some, this instance may be considered a prank. However, the Japanese government and the restaurant chain did not see it that way at all. And this incident was actually dubbed sushi terrorism because of how seriously it was taken by Japanese officials. Because of the widespread outrage that was caused by this viral video, action was taken by both the police and the company that owned Shishiro. The boy that did this food licking was arrested, but on top of being arrested by the police, he was also sued by Shishiro for over $480,000 in damages. And while being sued for nearly $500,000 may seem steep for licking some food, you have to understand that A, that's unacceptable and just disgusting and could be a health hazard if this individual, had diseases. But even still, this video going viral was detrimental for the restaurant itself and ended up causing the Shishiro restaurant chain nearly 16 billion yen in market value, simply because people saw this video, got grossed out, and decided they wouldn't be returning anytime soon. But not only did the company lose money because people were simply not going, the stock value of this company also dropped massively because investors were speculative about how the company can recover from such a PR disaster. And because the stock for the parent company that owned Shishiro tanked, Shishiro acted quickly and seemingly overnight replaced all of their real conveyor belts with real food with digital conveyor belts that had digital food that you can click on to order foods, but gone were the days where real food would just pass you by. And honestly, it's unfortunate that, well, one person ruined it for everybody. Although there is an argument to be made that while this dumb prank was disgusting, it also did expose a vulnerability that could have had worse consequences if somebody more devious wanted to expose it. But what do you guys think? Feel free to pause quickly and comment, but I'm gonna move on. The Tylenol tragedy. If you're somebody with an active Netflix subscription and a fan of true crime, then you very likely saw the documentary recently released about the Tylenol murders. This documentary was both interesting and also shocking, because as somebody who was born nearly 20 years after the Tylenol murder event took place, it's really quite crazy to try to imagine what a medicine bottle would look like without tamper-proof protection. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what the Tylenol murders are, they're actually rather mysterious. And to sum it up rather briefly, from September to October in 1982, there was a string of at least 7 deaths that were attributed to a mass poisoning of Tylenol extra-strength pills. This event was extremely unfortunate and killed both men, women, and children. And one of the saddest parts about this entire situation is that not only was nobody ever caught and convicted for this mass poisoning due to the fact that it made major headlines, also inspired other lunatics to poison other medicine bottles across the country. That's about all the detail I'm going to go into in regards to the murder specifically, primarily because next week I'm posting my part 2 to my Killers on the Loose video. And all I'm going to say is the Tylenol murders may make an appearance on that list. So if you're waiting for part 2 to my now fastest growing video, well, tune in next week. But focusing back in on the aftermath of this extremely upsetting situation. What happened and what did somebody ruin for everybody? Well, as I mentioned earlier, when these murders took place in 1982, medicine bottles had nowhere near the precautions they have today, largely because of this event. But the aftermath of these murders wasn't just 7 innocent people dead and Tylenol now having to put a few extra steps in the process of opening a bottle. As I already stated, when this story hit the mainstream, it not only inspired copycats, but terrorized the entire nation, as now anything seemed like it could have been potentially contaminated. And if you're somebody who experiences contamination OCD, I can only imagine that this would be a living nightmare. During the time that these murders took place, Tylenol had a 35% market share when it comes to over-the-counter pain medication. But after the murders took place, that market share dropped from 35% to 8%. And it took a lot of action from Tylenol to rebuild that trust among the community. And while these murders were undoubtedly tragic, there was at least a positive outcome out of these nearly unthinkable actions. That positive outcome, of course, being A, accountability from pharmaceutical companies and also widespread reform. For example, as soon as this crisis took place, Johnson & Johnson, the company that owns Tylenol, issued a massive recall, essentially taking over $100 million worth of product off shelves across the nation. On top of this, Johnson & Johnson established a strong relationship with the Chicago Police Department, where the murders took place, to further be involved in the investigation. And on top of this, they also formed stronger bonds with the FBI and the FDA. All of these relationships were formed with the hope of finding the person who laced the Tylenol tablets that ended up killing innocent people. But of course, the most notable outcome that came out of this entire tragedy was the development and implementation of tamper-resistant packaging, most notably being induction seals. You know, the things that are really annoying to peel off every time you open basically anything nowadays. This tamper-resistant packaging became more or less of an industry standard, and that is a genuinely positive outcome, although it's upsetting that it took such tragedy for this seemingly simple implementation to be, well, implemented. But that's just on the Johnson & Johnson side. On the governmental side, product tampering was made an official crime to further prevent any actions even remotely similar to the Tylenol murders. And on top of both of these beneficial changes, the FDA also introduced more stringent regulations when it comes to filled capsules instead of powder-pressed tablets to help further prevent product tampering. And it was with all of these positive changes, and I'm sure millions, if not billions spent in PR, Tylenol's market share was able to return in only a year's time, which is rather impressive. But to circle this back to the entire point of this video, things that got banned because one person ruined it, let's dissect this a bit. What was technically banned in this situation? Well, I guess product tampering and, well, unsealed pill bottles. And while those are things that are definitely not beneficial, the reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically was because, well, nothing was really banned per se besides things that already should have been banned, but I wanted to talk about it because one person definitely ruined something for everybody. That being basically the trust of people to not mess with products on shelves, causing almost everything nowadays to be sealed for your safety. Or at least that's what they say. And ultimately, I do think this was a beneficial change, although it is kind of upsetting why it is required. But just so this video technically fits the theme, the thing that was banned was, yeah, you can't sell pharmaceuticals without having a tamper-proof seal. But in case you want more of an example of ruining for everybody, although it wasn't banned, in that Halloween that followed the Tylenol murders in October of 1982, because people were so paranoid about the recently poisoned Tylenol, people were extremely suspicious of poisoned candy, which is why in Halloween of 1982, it was reported that Halloween attendance across the country was at an all-time low. And grocery stores even reported that candy sales were down over 20% compared to previous years, which honestly, I believe is a valid fear. And is just another upsetting example of how one person's actions can affect, well, an entire nation. The mustache must go. I wish I had a better transition, but you know how I just talked about one person's actions affecting an entire country? Well, now we're going to discuss how one person's actions affected, well, the entire world. Look at this image right here. What is the first thing when you think of when you see this piece of facial hair? Did you say famous, beloved comedian Charlie Chaplin? Well, I'm sure a few of you little hipsters did, but I would say the overwhelming majority of you instantly thought of Adolf Hitler when you saw this mustache. And I would bet money that you don't even know the name of this mustache. If you ever had to refer to this mustache, you would call it a Hitler mustache, which just goes to prove how synonymous this mustache is with the evil dictator from Nazi Germany. The traditional name of this mustache is known as a toothbrush mustache, and it's a small, narrow style of mustache that just sits on the center of your upper lip. And as I mentioned, before it gained popularity in, well, politics, it was popular among normal people as well as comedy legends such as Charlie Chaplin and Oliver Hardy. But if you try to sport this mustache yourself, well, nobody's gonna say, hey, nice Charlie Chaplin mustache. And it was for this reason that this facial hair was more or less retired. Admittedly, the toothbrush mustache, at least to my knowledge, was never formally outright banned, at least legally. But I would definitely say socially, this mustache was definitely banned, although that doesn't mean that there was attempts to bring it back. Probably the most infamous example of somebody sporting a toothbrush mustache in the more modern era is Michael Jordan of all people. And you've just got to ask yourself, if anybody can bring back a piece of culturally banned facial hair, it has to be basketball legend Michael Jordan, right? But unfortunately, even he was not powerful enough to overcome the stigma of the mustache. And it was for this reason that even he himself faced controversy for sporting this mustache that, in my opinion, didn't really resemble a Hitler mustache too much because he also had a little bit of a goatee thing going on. And also there's some other glaring differences between him and Hitler. Mainly the haircut. I think it's just the haircut. But regardless, not only did he decide to have this mustache, but he also rocked it in a legit commercial. And I guess nobody on set just told him to not do that. But, you know, it's Michael Jordan in his prime. I wouldn't either. But yeah, even Michael Jordan couldn't have a mustache that even loosely resembled the toothbrush mustache simply because the stigma is just so bad. And I guess rightfully so. Although it is a bit unfortunate because the mustache didn't do anything. It was the man wearing the mustache. But in case something being socially banned isn't enough for you, well, there's also a plethora of things that are actually banned due to the actions of Adolf Hitler. One of the more interesting bans is the fact that several countries have actually outright banned naming yourself or your child Adolf Hitler. For example, in Germany, Malaysia, Mexico, and New Zealand, it is all illegal to be named Adolf Hitler, which I think is understandable. But I think potentially more interesting is that in some US states, it is also prohibited to be named Adolf, although this isn't federally enforced and it's on a state-by-state basis. And another rather unfortunate byproduct of the entire, well, Nazi thing, besides all of the obvious war crimes and acts against humanity, is the fact that Hitler not only stole the swastika from Hinduism, but essentially tarnished the symbol forever. You see, I think it's relatively common knowledge now that the swastika doesn't originate with the Nazi Party. It actually originates in Hindu culture. In some Hindu cultures, the swastika can either mean prosperity and good luck, or being conducive to well-being, and it's a generally positive symbol. However, when the Nazis appropriated the symbol and used it to, well, represent one of the worst regimes to ever exist in modern, if not all of history, the symbol that they appropriated was essentially tarnished forever. Which is unfortunate because there has been some viral videos online of some uneducated person with a camera berating an Indian person for being a Nazi, when in reality, that's not the case at all. Beyond these few more lighter-hearted examples, there's a lot of other things that were outright banned due to the actions of Adolf Hitler. Although, for the sake of this video being a little bit more lighthearted, I want to discuss some that were not as, well, straight up depressing. And just to quickly save this video from getting too dark, I just wanted to say, by the time you're watching this video, we probably hit 1 million subscribers. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for all of the love and support on the entire channel. If you like my content and like what I do on this channel, please consider subscribing. We are no longer on the road to 1 million, we are on the road to 2 million. And if we're being honest, 10 million. At least that's the goal for now. YouTube does tell me that nearly 75% of you are not subscribed. So if you're watching this video and want to see videos from me every single Friday, subscribe and maybe even turn on the bell icon so you actually get notified when my videos go live. Oh, and by the way, if you really like this video, leave a like or comment part 2, and I'll definitely make a part 2 because I love making videos that my viewers actually want to see. But enough shilling. Thank you guys so much for the support. Let's get to our final section. Satisfaction not guaranteed. In the year 2025 and soon to be 2026, consumers are more privy than ever. And that's because businesses and individuals have been scamming people since the beginning of time. If you don't believe me, watch my video about scams in every time period. But with that being said, with people being more and more skeptical, businesses have had to come up with ways to convince customers that not only are they not being scammed, but if they are unhappy with their purchase, the business will take care of them. And it was for this reason that the satisfaction guarantee was established. The satisfaction guarantee is not necessarily a formal or governmental rule, it's essentially just a marketing trend and a company policy that kind of took off across corporate America. And honestly, it's a positive one one that's in the consumer's favor. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I hear satisfaction guaranteed or refunds with no questions asked, I always am a bit skeptical. Although I've never really taken up any brands on this besides, well, you know, the basic refund. But I may be more of a rare breed here, because I think some people get their fair use out of satisfaction guaranteed, and in the case I'm about to discuss, some people, unfortunately, well, abuse this system and ruin it for everyone. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of people abusing systems that are meant to help people and just offer fairness to all. And those people, I can confidently say, suck. And while to this day, satisfaction guarantees are still offered widely, I do want to discuss one example where somebody's selfish behavior revoked the consumer rights of a lot of customers from a specific brand. The brand in question is LL Bean. LL Bean is a famous clothing company that has had an almost legendary lifetime guarantee that it's offered for a long time on most of its clothes. The company took pride in this guarantee and used it as a symbol of the company's commitment to their product quality and overall customer satisfaction. And that, in my opinion, is noble. But as we learned in the first section of this video, no good deed goes unpunished. And just like somebody on death row exploiting a generous Texas prison, somebody buying jeans is gonna exploit a customer satisfaction policy. So here's the deal. For the longest time, LL Bean had one of the best lifetime guarantees possible, and it actually went on for decades. How it worked is customers could return any LL Bean product at any time to any location for a full refund. It didn't matter how old or how worn the garment was. If you had an LL Bean garment and you were no longer satisfied with it, you could take it to any LL Bean store to have it replaced. And in my opinion, that system is so cool. But of course, people had to ruin it. And in the case of LL Bean, they in 2018 made a statement and officially changed their policy. They essentially ended and revoked the lifetime guarantee on most of their products, limiting it to the standard return within a year if you have a proof of purchase. The 1-year return compared to the 30-day return is still generous, but it's a massive shift from what they originally had. And LL Bean even said themselves that the reason that they ended this program was due to a pattern of abuse of a small group of people, and they could no longer enable this behavior. Now, with that being said, LL Bean never pursued any legal actions or dropped any specific customer names, although they did make it known that people were abusing their generosity, and for that reason, they had to make some changes. This is definitely one of the more lighter examples we've discussed in this video, but it's definitely something that affects probably the most of us. And to me, it's truly just upsetting how one person or a small group of people can truly ruin a good thing for everybody. And I know it's easy at this point to get nihilistic and pessimistic and lose faith in humanity, but understand that it only is a small group of people doing it. And while it sucks that good things are being ruined, most people aren't doing these awful things. But I guess if we've learned anything from this video, all it takes is one. The luckiest people who survived the impossible. Frane Salak. Frane was born in June of 1929 in Yugoslavia. He was born unexpectedly 2 months early while his parents were on a boat in the Adriatic Sea. Fortunately, both him and his mother survived, and it's reported that his father even cut the umbilical cord with a fishing knife. When Frane was only 11 months old, he had life-threatening intestinal issues that nearly took his life. And at 11 years old, Frane nearly lost his eyesight completely, but reportedly recovered due to his mother's prayers to Saint Teresa and a nun's herbal medicine. Already, the childhood of Frane sounds like somebody who survived deadly and dangerous situations multiple times. But believe it or not, the childhood of Frane Salek is actually some of the most peaceful times in his entire life. And the situations that made him now famous actually all took place after the age of 33 years old. From the age of 11 to 33, Frane lived a relatively normal life. He went to music school, became a music teacher, got married, got divorced, had a child, and got remarried, essentially living the standard Eastern European way of life. However, it was that way of life that was challenged on a train ride from Bosnia to Yugoslavia in January of 1962. According to Frane himself, he was riding this train home from work, and he was on this train with the elderly mother of the mayor of Stone. Stone being a neighboring city to the one he was born in Croatia. According to Frane, the elderly mayor's mother was his responsibility to protect, and that he did. During the train ride on this cold, rainy day, the train is traveling along a canyon. And while the landscape of this canyon was beautiful, the conditions of this canyon were about to put him in a situation far from it. It's believed that only hours prior to this train voyage, a small mudslide near the top of the canyon caused a rock fall to land directly on the train track. And while this went unnoticed by the train conductor, when the train hit the rocks on the track, it successfully derailed the train, plunging the train into freezing cold waters. According to Frane, after the train hit the water, he told the old woman to hold on to him and hold her nose as he broke the train window with his elbow and successfully swam him and the old woman to shore, although Frane did sustain a broken arm and hypothermia. And while Frane and this elderly woman did survive, the 17 other passengers on the train unfortunately passed away in the accident. That situation alone is the story of a lifetime. Although for Frayne, this is only the beginning of his multi-chapter story with his close encounters with death. Only a year later, after the alleged heroic train situation, in 1963, Frayne would find himself in another life-threatening situation. During this time, Frayne is teaching music in Slovenia as part of his service in a military band for the Yugoslavians People Party. Although, during his time abroad, he receives a desperate call from his mother, and she informs Frayne that she has been hospitalized and desperately needs him to come visit her, as this might be his last opportunity to say goodbye. Obviously, understanding the severity of his situation, Frayne books the next flight from Slovenia back to Croatia, and only hours after receiving this desperate call, he is in the air. The aircraft he's on is known as a DC-10, and while it's a relatively large plane, this flight only has 17 passengers and 4 crew aboard. And at some point during this short flight, Frayne begins to strike up a conversation with the flight attendant near an emergency exit to try to calm his nerves. This was his first flight ever, and it coincidentally ended up being his last as well. Frayne has told reporters that during his conversation with the flight attendant, he heard a massive bang on the plane, and then almost immediately after, the exit door was ripped off of the plane behind him, causing the change in pressure to suck him out of the airplane. It is then alleged that he fell 800 meters before harshly landing in a haystack in a small farm village in Croatia. According to Frayne, he spent 4 days in a coma and then woke up in the hospital, where he learned that he had no serious injuries besides the loss of consciousness and, well, coma. During interviews decades after the incident took place, Frayne also reported that the loud bang heard on the plane was likely the tail of the plane striking a mountain, causing a fire in the plane and causing everybody on the plane besides him and the stewardess he was talking to pass away. Although that's something we'll discuss more later. But in case a train crash or a plane crash weren't enough, don't worry, because there's more. In 1966, Frayne was riding a bus from Yugoslavia to Croatia when the bus skidded off the road into the river, once again drowning passengers and leaving Frayne injured, although alive. Following these now train, plane, and bus accidents, Frayne also allegedly was involved in 3 separate car accidents where he defied death every single time. The first car accident alleged by Frayne involves his car catching fire as he was driving it, nearly killing him in the process. And then a year later, he had another incident with his car catching fire, although this time the fire wasn't in the engine bay, the fire was being blown directly at him through the air vents, singeing his hair, although he was able to get out of the car in time before it exploded. And then years after that, Frayne alleges that he was driving on a canyon road when a United Nations military truck improperly took a curve on this steep mountain road, causing Frayne to swerve into a guardrail, causing his car to fly off of a cliff. However, because Frayne was not wearing a seatbelt, he was able to jump out of his car and land in a tree before his car made a 300-foot plummet to the bottom of the canyon and exploded. Now, after surviving all of these death-defying situations, it would be reasonable to say that this guy has likely won the lottery multiple times over. Although in 2002, that metaphor would also become reality, because during that year, Frayne bought a lottery ticket and ended up winning over $1 million equivalent. It was after this notable lottery winning when the story of Frayne Selleck kind of became publicly known, because after this lottery winning, he began doing public interviews, and the stories that he was telling was simply too much to deny. And he began to do more and more interviews, and these stories began to go viral. So viral, in fact, that in 2004, Frayne even starred in a Doritos commercial. And it's even alleged that during the drive home from this Doritos commercial, he hit a deer in his car, which is unfortunate and also dangerous. Now, if you've been paying extra attention, you would have noticed that I've been putting extra emphasis on the fact that all of these stories are either alleged or reported by Frayne and not, well, proven. Almost all of the death-defying stories we know about Frayne became widely known decades after they happened. And out of all of these now famous stories, none of them have been independently verified. And there has also been contradictions found within different tellings of these stories by Frayne, meaning that there may be a bit of fiction mixed in with the facts. Although I did want to tell this story because of how insane it is and how, well, popular it's kind of became. Regardless if you believe Frayne or not, or you believe he was punching up his stories or making up complete fairy tales, the reality is Frayne is famously known as one of the most lucky, unlucky men to ever live. And whether or not his stories actually happened, or even kind of happened, we may never know. Frayne passed away at the age of 87 in 2016. And today, we are still telling the stories that he told. Fact or fiction, Frayne, the humble music teacher from Croatia, turned himself from man to legend. Ron Hunt. It is August 2003, and Ron Hunt is a 41-year-old construction worker working in California. He is your average run-of-the-mill blue-collar man. He likes truck, beer, boob, and he certainly doesn't mind getting an eyeful of either of those things. However, on this fateful day, Ron was about to get an eyeful of something he did not bargain for. This day on the job site started like any other, briefing with the other contractors and then getting right to work. Shortly after starting his shift, Ron was tasked drilling a hole in cement roughly 5 to 10 feet off of the ground. This task was nothing new to Ron, and he grabbed the appropriate tools. He grabbed an impact drill with an 18-inch chip auger drill bit and a 6-foot ladder. Approaching the wall on the job site that required the hole, Ron carefully set up the ladder, ensured that it was sturdy, and then began to climb the ladder and then, of course, drill. However, almost instantly after beginning to drill this hole, Ron could tell that something was not right. The 18-inch drill bit was struggling to make any progress into the concrete, and while Ron was trying to use leverage to force it into the guide hole, he noticed that the ladder was not as sturdy as he once thought. Although, almost immediately after noticing that the ladder was not extremely stable, his footing gave way from right below him, and he lost his balance and fell forward. This situation is terrifying. However, for Ron, this is something that he was trained for. And as a construction worker with decades of experience, he knew that when you're working at heights, if you are falling, you should throw your tool as far away as you can. And that he did. Although, unfortunately, Ron did not throw the drill far enough. And instead of having the drill land feet away from him, the drill landed drill side up on the ground directly below Ron. And Ron fell directly onto the drill, having the drill bit penetrate through his right eye through the back of his skull. An injury that undoubtedly would kill 99.9% of people that it would happen to. Although for Ron, this extremely unlucky situation would actually turn out to be the luckiest situation of his life. Immediately following the fall, Ron's coworkers ran to his side. And while the scene was absolutely gruesome, they remained calm and called for help immediately. While waiting for help, Ron was not only shockingly alive, but conscious, and was able to feel around his head to try to understand how severe the injury was. And when he felt the entry point of the drill on his eye and the exit point on the back of his head, he knew he was in serious trouble. Although he didn't let that situation get the better of him. Due to Ron's coworkers' quick response, the paramedics arrived only minutes after the accident happened. And after examining Ron, a helicopter arrived to airlift him to a medical center in Reno, Nevada. Interestingly, it has been reported, not by Ron, but by actual doctors and nurses, that during his time in the hospital while he was being examined by professionals, Ron was not only conscious and talking, but also lighthearted and cracking jokes. Meaning that even in his most dire times, he was able to keep a light heart, which to me is just so cool and honestly respectable. However, even though Ron was able to laugh and joke, the situation was still extremely life-threatening and difficult, considering that in most instances, this injury would be instant death. Therefore, this has not been an injury that has been often treated, meaning that the medical professionals not only had to think fast, but leave no room for error. Because while Ron was alive now, there was so many opportunities for them to accidentally kill him while trying to remove the drill bit. While the doctors and nurses were examining Ron, they were able to discover why this injury didn't kill him. And that's because the path that this drill bit took through Ron's skull was almost the perfect trajectory to not puncture the brain whatsoever. Looking at an x-ray, they were able to see that the drill bit literally pushed the brain out of the way rather than penetrating through it, which is why Ron not only survived, but also had no neurological issues. He wasn't paralyzed, he wasn't lacking motor skills or speech function, he was all there, just with a giant metal spike in his head. Interestingly, one of the first treatments that Ron received was a tetanus shot and an IV full of antibiotics. And this is because there was a massive non-sterile foreign object that not only caused, but also resided within multiple lacerations to the head, holes in the skull, and was also currently in contact with the brain raw. And because of this, there was an overwhelming opportunity for infection to take place either in the skull, the brain, or either of the skin lacerations. Meaning that even if they were able to successfully remove this drill, there was still a significant chance of infection taking Ron's life. After receiving this first dose of antibiotics, he was sent to the operating room, where the removal procedure began. And while it may seem like one of the most counterintuitive and dangerous methods, the way that the doctors decided to remove the drill bit was by using the same way that it got in. That's right. In the operating room, they put Ron on a ladder and made him fall on the ground so that the floor would push the drill bit out. That's a lie. I'm totally joking. What they actually did in the operating room was slowly and carefully screw the drill bit in reverse so that it would easily make its way out. And the reason they were able to do this was because there was no brain tissue entrapped in the drill. Because it wasn't penetrated, it was simply pushed to the side. And once the drill was fully removed from the skull, the doctors were then able to begin a massive cleanup job, making sure that this huge wound was not and did not get infected. They removed dirt, debris, bone fragments, and dead tissue, which unfortunately included his right eye. Although after the surgery and the following surgery to fix some of the fractures in his skull, Ron spent a few weeks in hospital being monitored to ensure that no infections would grow, and once doctors were satisfied that his condition was stable, he was released to go home and went on to live a normal life, and actually became known as the Miracle Man because of how lucky and unlucky this man was. After everything was said and done, the only lasting impacts that Ron had due to this event were the fact that he was blind in the right eye because he didn't have a right eye, and nerve damage to one of the nerves on the right side of his face, meaning that the right side of his face was essentially paralyzed. But beyond those two effects specifically, Ron made a full recovery and still to this day lives a normal life. And while it definitely feels a bit odd to call somebody lucky for losing an eye and having facial nerve damage, when you understand the context of the situation, it's easy to see how lucky and unlucky Ron truly was. Unlucky, obviously, because of the accident that took place, but lucky because he literally survived the impossible, and potentially the world's most severe lobotomy we've ever seen.
Roger Woodward.
It was a warm July day in 1960, and a New York father decided it was the perfect day to take his two children on a boat ride. The location that this father decided to take his children on the boat ride was an area of water in New York known as the Upper Niagara River, the river that leads directly to Niagara Falls, the iconic waterfall on the border of the United States and Canada. This was a boat ride that this man had done numerous times before, although on this boat ride, things would not go so smoothly. As reported by Roger Woodward himself, decades after the event took place, his recollection of events are as follows. Roger, the son, his sister, and his father were all enjoying the relatively standard boat ride when Roger asked his father if he could steer the boat for a little while. His father agreed and allowed him to sit on his lap on the seat, although almost instantly after joining his father at the wheel, the waters began to get dangerously rough and the boat began to develop motor trouble, leaving the boat essentially stranded in dangerous water. Realizing that the situation was dire, Roger's father removed Roger from his lap and tried to take control of the boat, although his efforts were unsuccessful, and the boat actually ended up capsizing in the river due to the severity of the waters they were in. When the boat capsized, all three of the family members were tossed into the water, and each one of them had a different experience. Roger's sister, who was 17 at the time, was shockingly saved and pulled out of the water only 6 meters of the edge of the falls. Although for her brother, Roger, and her dad, they were not so lucky to be saved. And both Roger Woodward and his father went over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. Now, if you know anything about Niagara Falls, there has been numerous people who have gone over the falls, many of which who have not survived. It's actually been estimated that since 1850, there have been at least 5,000 people who have gone over the falls. And it's also estimated that there are 20 to 30 deaths that occur annually at Niagara Falls, although mostly due to personal intention, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, out of those thousands of people that have gone over the falls, it is reported that only 16 to 20 have been confirmed to survive the extremely deadly and dangerous Niagara Falls. Now, I mentioned this to give context about exactly how deadly and rare it is to even survive. Just doing some quick math based on the estimates, that's literally a 0.05% chance of surviving. Back to the story, however. Unfortunately, both Roger and his father were swept up in the rapids and sent down Niagara Falls. Roger's father, unfortunately and unsurprisingly, perished in the falls. But somehow, miraculously, Roger Woodward survived being sent down Niagara Falls at the age of only 7 years old. After being sent down the waterfall, surviving the immense pressure of the water, nearly missing all of the jagged and deadly rocks at the bottom of the falls, and not drowning, Roger was actually spotted by tourists on the Maid of the Mist boat. It's a little boat that goes to the bottom of Niagara Falls, and the crew quickly made a beeline over to the boy as they saw his bright orange life jacket, likely the item that saved this boy's life. After the captain put the boat directly beside Roger, his crew threw a life preserver and they were able to successfully bring him on board merely minutes after spotting him. Roger was immediately sent to the Niagara General Hospital, where he stayed for only 3 days with a minor concussion and bruises. There has been numerous daredevils who have tried to make safe and insulated barrels to go over the falls in, and over half of them have died. Although this 7-year-old boy who was simply trying to have a good time with his family went over the falls, survived, and lived to tell the tale. And he has since this event visited Niagara Falls often into his adulthood. Roger was undoubtedly extremely lucky in this extremely unlucky situation, and he has gone on record saying that he is extremely grateful to be alive. Speaking of lucky situations, I would say it's pretty lucky that you found this channel. Realistically, there are millions of YouTube channels, and you could be watching anything right now. So the fact that you found my channel, to me, is super lucky, and I hope that you're enjoying this video. Now, I've never really made a video on this topic before, so I just wanted to say if you guys would love to see a part 2 about people that survived the impossible, the luckiest, unlucky people, leave a like or leave a comment below saying part 2 so that I know you guys want more of this topic. If you're new here and haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, because we make cool videos every single Friday. But with that being said, let's get to the final entry of this list. Bill Morgan. The year is 1998, and Bill Morgan is a 37-year-old truck driver living in a camper van. Not a lot is known publicly about the early life of Bill Morgan, but knowing that he was born and raised in Australia, we can assume that he grew up playing with spiders and fighting kangaroos. Regardless, from his birth to the age of 37, it's believed that Bill lived the life of the average Australian man, doing honest work and traveling the country he loved in his camper van. A simple and respectable life. Although everything was about to change on one fateful day. During what appeared to be a relatively normal drive in his camper van, Bill was struck and nearly killed in a car crash that seemingly happened in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, Bill was able to survive this car accident, although not by much. And while he was recovering in the hospital, it was discovered that due to this car accident, he actually developed a heart condition. Now, while most of us would consider a heart condition a better trade-off than death in this situation, this heart condition was still not ideal. And what doctors recommended to Bill was that he take a certain medication to help relieve his symptoms and protect his heart. Although when Bill started taking this medication, he suffered a severe allergic reaction that once again nearly killed him by ironically triggering a heart attack. After experiencing this cardiac event due to this medication, Bill was declared clinically dead for 14.5 minutes. Although he was miraculously revived by paramedics and was then sent to the hospital where he spent 12 days in a coma. And during this time, things were not looking good. And doctors were actually advocating to Bill's family that they should potentially consider end-of-life planning and, well, pulling the plug. And while that sounds absolutely unfair and devastating and cruel, the reality is it wasn't necessarily bad advice from a professional perspective. And that's because previously, as we know, Bill was clinically dead for 14.5 minutes, which statistically speaking means that even if he were to recover from the coma, he would be in a severe, likely vegetative state due to the cognitive decline his brain would have experienced without having oxygen for such an amount of time. For context, brain damage begins to occur at only 4 minutes without oxygen. So the fact that he was dead for over 14 minutes paints a pretty severe picture. However, because Bill had already been so lucky up until this point, and his family was so determined and dedicated, they decided to do no such thing. Unfortunately, after 12 days of being in a coma, he not only woke up, but woke up and made a full recovery, having all of his mental faculties and being able to walk and talk. Something that has to be a statistic anomaly. But we're not done yet. So far, Bill has beaten death in the form of a car accident, in the form of an allergic reaction, in the form of being literally clinically dead, and in the form of a coma. Although, even though every one of those instances is an expression of bad luck, it's also an expression of good luck because he, well, survived them seemingly unscathed. Although, unbelievably, he didn't use up all of his luck on all of these near-death experiences. And that's because in the year following the car crash and coma, Bill not only bought a lottery scratcher ticket, something he did weekly, but he also won. And he didn't win $5 or $10, he won a Toyota Corolla that was worth anywhere from $17,000 to $30,000 Australian dollars. And this is where the story gets really quite interesting, because similar to Frayn's story at the beginning of this video, after this lottery winning, Bill's story became publicly televised, and it was spreading rapidly and so interesting because of how much misfortune he experienced, only to then go on and not only survive, but win the lottery. And because his story was so interesting, the news wanted to do a segment about Bill. While filming the segment, the news anchor asked Bill if he minded buying a lottery ticket so they could reenact the scene where he won the car. And since scratching lottery tickets was a pastime of Bill's, he had no issue doing such. Although, to the surprise of everybody, when Bill went ahead and bought and scratched off the lottery ticket simply to just get some B-roll for the news, he was shocked at what he had found. While the cameras were rolling and Bill was simply silently scratching off a ticket, Bill suddenly froze and the energy in the room paused. Bill turned around, looked directly at the camera, and quietly said, "I just won $250,000. I'm not joking. I just won $250,000. And then immediately after realizing what he had just said and won, he put his hands over his head and said, "Please don't film me. I don't believe this is happening. I think I will have another heart attack." Bill was obviously shocked about what had just happened, likely more shocked than us. And once the reality set in a bit more and he knew he wasn't having a heart attack, he quickly called his fiancée, told her that they could buy a new house, and she even later went on to tell the news, quote, I hope he hadn't used up all of his good luck. And one of my favorite parts about the story is that this is verifiable, and the footage of this happening is literally on YouTube right now. I'm gonna play a short clip of it, but it is just so wholesome to see this man's genuine reaction to finally catching a break after nearly losing his life multiple times, realistically due to no fault of his own. I don't know about you, but I find that video so wholesome, and I just love when genuine, real people get what they deserve. In a good way. In my opinion, Bill is a legend. And while all of this happened back in 1998 and 1999, as of 2020, Bill still lives in Melbourne with his wife. And while he does still suffer with heart issues and arthritis because of the car accident, he is grateful for his life, even stating, quote, "I've had a bonus of 22 years. Oh wait, I guess I should maybe say this Australian. I've had okay, that's not Australian. I've had okay, let me try it one more time. Like, I'm trying my hardest. Yeah, I've had a bonus of 22 years. Okay, like, I'm gonna try it, but okay, let's just try it. I've had a bonus of 22 years, and that's the, wait, again. I've had a bonus of 22 years, and that's the best way to live your life. Every day I get up and put on my shoes, and even if I'm not real well, I still shuffle down the road and smell the roses. Look at the sun and think about how lucky I am." That was potentially the worst accent you've ever heard, but it's also a true expression of gratitude, which for me makes Bill that much more of a legend. And it's even reported that to this very day, Bill is still buying lottery tickets every single week. And who knows, maybe soon there'll be an update to this video where Bill won the lottery once again. But even if he never does, I would say he is very much so a lucky man who beat some pretty unlucky situations. Ancient mysteries that were finally solved. The collapse of classic Mayan civilization. The ancient Maya civilization has some of the coolest lore when it comes to ancient history. Most notably because of their architecture, their mathematics, their astronomical system, and likely most famously, their calendar. In case you've been living under a rock, remember when in 2012, everybody thought the world was just gonna, end? That was because of the Mayan calendar, and that actually wasn't an end of the world prediction. It was actually more or less of a formatting error. Regardless, the Mayan civilization was an extremely advanced civilization that existed for thousands of years. And it's recorded that the Mayan civilization dates back as far as 2000 BC. Obviously, starting from humble beginnings, consisting of simple villages and early agricultural development. It took roughly 1200 years from 2000 BC to 750 BC for the Maya civilization to start seeing significant societal development, specifically with the development of large architectural projects and even writing. These early years in Mayan history are known as the pre-classic era. And I guess there's three primary time periods when speaking on Mayan history: pre-classic period, the classic period, and the post-classic period. And the collapse of Mayan civilization we're going to be talking about is specifically the collapse of the classic period, which is the one that was most mysterious and only recently understood fully. From roughly 2000 BC to 250 AD, the Mayan civilization was developed greatly, which leads us to the classical period of the Mayan civilization. This classic period of Mayan civilization is typically categorized by construction and urbanism, and on top of the already established development in architecture, agriculture, and scripting, there was now also significant development in intellectual and artistic activities, which are some of the most famous and celebrated parts of Mayan culture still to this day. During this classic period from 250 AD to 900 AD, there was cities with populations as large as 120,000 people, and there was numerous cities spread across all of Maya with established trade networks connecting all of them. But this major development brings us to our first historical mystery. From the ancient times going back as far as 2000 BC to more early modern times in 900 AD, the Mayan civilization saw immense development in almost every aspect of society. They had trade, architecture, agriculture, literature, art. It seemed like the Mayan civilization only had progress. But then something interesting happened. During the 9th century, it seemed like almost out of nowhere, Mayan cities were just collapsing and being abandoned, leaving these prosperous and developed cities to essentially rot for a reason that no archaeologist could understand until now. For the longest time, archaeologists that dedicated their life to understand the Mayans could not pin a single answer to this question. What happened to classic Mayan civilization? There was no one ice age or asteroid or army or anything they could pin on this time frame to draw a reasonable conclusion to why such a developed and growing civilization would essentially just abandon their homeland. That was until 2012, when it was discovered that there was no one reason for the collapse of classic Maya. It was actually a combination of issues that caused an interconnected crisis, and it took experts from a plethora of different studies to kind of come to this conclusion, including archaeologists, scientists, and satellite imaging experts. But here's the conclusion that they eventually came to. One of the biggest factors that played a major role in these classic Mayan cities being abandoned was essentially a major major political collapse. And even that collapse is multifaceted, because even that political instability was caused by a number of factors. So before we just blame everything on political instability, let's kind of look at the landscape of the time. Near the end of the classic Maya civilization, there was a lot going wrong. Specifically, deforestation, overpopulation, and drought, which all ultimately led to a massive lack of food. At this point in time, there was already a multi-decade-long drought going on in the area. Little to no rain, streams drying up, and soil fertility was at an all-time low. Coupling this with environmental stress from the deforestation, paired with also an exponentially growing population at the time, meant that things were only destined to fail. And because of this, the thriving developed city that was sustaining all of this life and growth was now crumbling beneath its feet because it couldn't sustain all of these people. But on top of people just being too crowded and too hungry, the current system of government almost had no capabilities of solving this issue at all. Specifically because the classic Mayan civilization was based on the ritual authority of the ruler, which means the Mayan ruler was only able to control things like construction, warfare, and ritual. Essentially things that only related to the Mayan tradition. But things like agriculture, food trade, and food distribution were completely out of the ruler's hands, meaning that there was no real system of power in place that could help end these ongoing issues that were at this point exponential. And because of the ongoing drought, the exponential growth of the population, and the lack of agricultural support, people had no other chance than to abandon these cities that they were living in, and most people ended up heading northward, abandoning this classic Mayan civilization that they had spent, at this point, thousands of years building. And while this 2012 conclusion kind of solves the mystery of what happened to classic Maya, the story of the Mayan civilization doesn't end there, because Mayan history didn't die out with classic Maya. There is still a post-classic period that went on, although it's an unfortunate one. This political instability that was experienced in classic Maya kind of echoed through post-classic Maya, and this continued instability didn't allow the Mayan people to settle as quickly and rebuild as they would have in previous times. But the major nail in the coffin, which was no mystery, was what happened at the very end of all Mayan civilization, which happened in the mid-1500s, and can be summarized in two words: Spanish conquests. The post-classic Mayan civilization was simply no match for the germs, steel, and armies that the Spanish had at the time. And while the Mayan civilization obviously no longer exists today, their descendants definitely do. And globally, there's over 6 million people that are still speaking the 28 different Mayan languages. Most of these people living in similar areas to where their ancestors did, which is pretty cool that their culture is able to live on. But yeah, archaeologists were stumped why Mayan civilization seemingly had a random exodus during the 9th century, and it took all the way up until 2012 for the solution to be unveiled: self-healing Roman concrete. At this point, I really don't think I need to explain why the Roman Empire was so impressive. The feats and lore of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire are just so cool. And we've talked about a lot of this history on this channel. Actually, my second video ever on this channel was about why Rome even fell in the first place. But that brings us to our next mystery. As I'm hoping most of you know, Rome fell a very long time ago. Although in the modern day, we still have a lot of architecture from ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. And this has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. And it's a reasonable question. How did the Romans have such effective, long-lasting structures made out of concrete that didn't have rebar, and they didn't have any of the modern math or tools or tricks that we have today with our modern concrete structures? There's a saying that goes, modern times require modern solutions, but I think there should also be a saying, ancient times require ancient solutions. And the ancient solutions that the Romans used for their concrete was genius. And it's definitely not an accident that so many Roman ruins are still in remarkable condition to this very day. In January of 2023, not even 3 years ago, a group of scientists from MIT and Harvard were doing a deep dive into Roman concrete when they finally came to the conclusion of the Romans' concrete success. And it's actually rather interesting. But let's take a step back. Before this discovery in MIT in 2023, all of the building blocks of Roman concrete were known. We knew that the Romans used volcanic rock, volcanic ash, seawater, and a little bit of slacked lime, essentially a limestone water mixture. But here's the caveat. Prior to this discovery in 2023, the going belief was that this slacked lime and limestone was not an actual important component in this concrete construction. It was more or less of a byproduct of poor patchwork and didn't actually belong to make the concrete better. It was just kind of there by mistake or due to low quality materials. But the irony is that this is actually the complete opposite of the truth. This limestone and slacked lime in this Roman concrete was the exact reason for its longevity over thousands of years. You see, the limestone wasn't there for looks or because it was cheap to add into concrete. The Romans knew that limestone would react with water in a way that would be beneficial for the concrete's longevity. Essentially, what the Romans Romans would do was they would create a concrete mixture, ensuring that pieces of limestone and slack lime were inside of the concrete made from this volcanic ash and seawater. And as this concrete was being processed and cured, there would essentially be small pockets of slack lime and limestone throughout all of the cement. Just imagine mint chocolate chip ice cream. The concrete is the mint ice cream, and then the chocolate chips are all the little bits of slack lime and limestone. And I apologize for not giving a trigger warning for mint chip ice cream. I know it's a very controversial ice cream, but I'm just gonna say it. I like it. Back to the mystery though, although this limestone didn't necessarily serve a huge purpose when the concrete was fresh and intact, as the concrete would begin to settle and shift and crack over time, this would expose the chunks of slack lime and limestone. And this is exactly where the magic happens. As these bits of slack lime and limestone would be exposed, water would begin to enter these cracks, and the reaction between the limestone and the water would cause a chemical reaction that would essentially begin to self-heal the concrete. And this seemingly rudimentary solution was actually the cornerstone of Roman concrete success, and the solution to a mystery that went on for decades. Strange Peruvian holes. Imagine you're an archaeologist in the early 1900s walking through rural Peru. It's hot, sunny, and you're getting pretty miserable when you notice a strange structure in the ground. It's a spirally, rocky thing, and you have no idea what it is. You take note of it, but keep moving, because it honestly could be anything. When eventually you notice another one, and then another one. You notice at this point so many throughout the day that you just can no longer ignore it, and you make a note of it. You bring it back to your archaeological buddies, but nobody has an answer. Nobody's seen these before, and they're not quite sure what these are or what their purpose was. These strange structures in the deserts of southern Peru likely had a purpose, but what was that purpose? The ancient Nazca people lived here, but were they advanced enough to build anything like this? And if they were building these things, what were they building them for? You ditch your friends and go to the library to try to find any archaeological archives of these structures existing, and there's really nothing you can find. You've been able to read historical accounts confirming that other people have seen these in the past, although any historical data is scarce, and there's absolutely no answer about them, only an acknowledgement of their existence. So at this point, you're stumped. And with this discovery, you set out on a journey for answers, but what you end up starting is a massive conspiracy theory on what these things could be. Decades after you first saw these in the early 1900s, theories are becoming more and more widespread as other archaeologists have began to study the Nazca area of Peru. At this point, it was believed that the Nazca people had pre-Columbian origins in this region, with a culture that likely flourished from 100 BC to 800 AD. But it was also believed that these structures were similar to Spanish mines and subterranean canals. And so by some, it was initially believed that these structures were potentially Spanish, although that theory was soon to be proven very wrong. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, a group of Italian researchers and archaeologists decided to study the Nazca area of Peru using satellite imaging, something that at that point hadn't been done yet for this purpose. And what they found was amazing. What they discovered was that this system of structures was much more extensive than they initially thought, and even saw that these structures were present in nearby settlements, which were dated and identified separately from this discovery. Further investigation showed that there is even structures in the Nazca drainage basin, which ultimately gave a lot more context to what these structures could have been. And it was ultimately concluded that these mysterious seeming structures were a subterranean irrigation system, or simply put, an underground well basically, to transfer water between settlements and areas in this vast desert. And with this discovery, it was ruled that no, the Spanish didn't build these. And while the Spanish could have very easily leveraged them while they were in the area, these specific structures were pre-Hispanic. And in 2017, the general consensus was that these structures were built as far back as 500 AD. And the combination of all of these discoveries definitely made some archaeologists reconsider how advanced they believed the Nazca people to be. The 4,000-year-old comb. In 2016, a group of archaeologists were in the ruins of Lachish, an ancient Canaanite city-state which is located in modern-day Israel. During this dig, they found a very interesting artifact that ended up being a very significant discovery for ancient language. During this dig, one of the archaeologists found an ivory comb. It doesn't really sound super exciting until you understand that this ivory comb was literally 3,700 years old. This ivory comb was made out of elephant ivory, and while this discovery in this artifact is amazing, it doesn't end there. On this small comb, there was a very faint and small sentence written. But what was interesting was, even though this artifact was extremely old, nearly 4,000 years old, the sentence that was written used the phonetic alphabet, which was extremely uncommon for this time. Typically during this time frame, hieroglyphs or other forms of script were what people used. So finding the phonetic alphabet was very interesting. But while this ancient artifact was cool, the mystery still stood. What did this say? And this mystery was actually relatively short-lived, as after it was found in 2016, the code was deciphered in 2021. And what was engraved on the comb goes as follows: "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." And I guess this was more or less of a blessing of your hair, or maybe a threat against potential lice living in your hair. Regardless, it's so cool that they were actually able to translate what was on this 4,000-year-old artifact. And historians believe that this artifact likely came from Egypt, because the region in which this artifact was found had no elephants anywhere nearby. And it was believed that this artifact was owned by a wealthy trader who was able to get luxury goods from other parts of the world. And who knows, maybe even just getting lice out of your hair during this time period was a luxury. So if I was one of the archaeologists on this dig, assuming that the structural integrity was solid on this comb, I would definitely run it through my hair, just to say I did it. And yes, I have hair. The mystery of the Ryukyu Islands. The Ryukyu Islands are a chain of small, isolated islands in the western Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan and east of China. In the modern day, these islands are part of the Okinawa prefecture in Japan, but that wasn't always the case. In the history of people on these islands actually go as far back as 35,000 years ago. But this is where the mystery comes into play. When human remains were first discovered on these islands and they were dated all the way back to the Paleolithic period, people were astonished to see any human life on this island. And because of that, the initial theory was that these people must have gotten here by accident, and that there was simply no way that people would intentionally sail so far to these remote islands, hundreds of kilometers away from any other major civilization. But that begs the question, if people never got to this island intentionally and only got here by accident, how did they get here by accident? And it was that exact question that a group of US-based researchers planned to answer. This study went on for a long time too. From 1989 all the way up until 2017, these organizations dropped 138 buoys from the eastern coast of Taiwan, as well as the northern tip of the Philippines. And they picked both of these two locations specifically because they were part of the Kuroshio Current, the world's fastest ocean current that literally almost hasn't changed in the last 100,000 years, so the data should be relatively consistent. And what they found after dropping all of these buoys from both of these locations, out of 138 of these buoys, none of them floated to these islands, and only 4 of them floated within a 20-kilometer radius of any of the islands, basically blowing up the theory that the humans that were on this island got there by accident, and further validated the theory that prehistoric humans set sail intentionally to find these islands and intentionally inhabited them. And it's just interesting because 35,000 years ago, these prehistoric humans were getting on boats and floating to undiscovered islands. And while this doesn't necessarily confirm that this is exactly what happened, researchers that were part of the project did say, quote, "It was more likely that the early seafarers had more carefully plotted their courses than had been assumed," which I think is a nice way of saying we underestimated these fuzzballs. But at least it does shine light on how these people even got to this island in the first place. Ancient perfume. Here's the deal. We live very differently from our ancient ancestors, but we actually kind of share a lot of similar traits and even in some cases luxuries. And one example of that is perfume. Nowadays, you know, it never hurts to put on a little Dior Sauvage, or maybe if you're in middle school, a little Axe body spray to, you know, get the pheromones going. But this seemingly modern activity is actually nothing of the sort. And our ancient ancestors were no stranger to putting on a little stank for the ladies. Or the guys. Let me explain. For a very long time, it was known and understood that our ancient ancestors used perfume. There was writings, there was evidence, they knew that this was a luxury item that the rich enjoyed. But up until a certain point, there was never any evidence of it around, and there was very little hope that we would be able to ever smell ancient perfume. That was until a jar of Roman perfume was found in a Spanish villa, in an ancient burial site where Roman settlers once lived. This perfume that was found was contained in a quartz bottle, which alone was considered to be a luxury item of the time. But it doesn't end there. This quartz bottle was hidden in a dark and dry place, and it was also tightly sealed in a tar-like substance that was later revealed to be bitumen. And because of the nearly perfect conditions that this perfume was kept in, the internal contents were preserved. And this was a massive discovery into what the Romans liked to smell like. Previous to this discovery, it was pretty well known that the Romans would use olive oil and other oils and animal fats as a base of their perfumes and colognes, and obviously that they used colognes and perfumes. But with this discovery, researchers were actually able to smell for the first time ever what Roman perfume would have smelled like. Laboratory analyses of the bottle revealed that the primary scent, at least in this bottle of perfume, was patchouli. And this was kind of an amazing discovery because patchouli is a tropical plant from Southeast Asia and was likely brought to Rome through trade networks. Now, I want to reiterate that the scientists didn't just pop off the cap and smell it and, oh wow, it smells like patchouli, this smells so good. Like, no, like the internal contents were preserved but not necessarily fresh. And it took a chemical analysis to even be able to identify the patchouli's chemical signature in the mush that was in this quartz flask. But it was obviously enough to give us a very interesting insight into what the Romans used for the perfume. And it solved a pretty cool mystery that we didn't even know we wanted the answer to. Roman coins found in Japan. We've already talked about ancient Rome in this video, and we're talking about them again, because when we're talking about cool ancient history and ancient mysteries, they're worth bringing up. Now, one ancient mystery about the Roman Empire was exactly how far were their trade routes established. For example, it was known that the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China knew of each other's existences, but it was kind of believed that they had no formal relationship, and their only understanding of each other kind of came through the established trade route that was basically spread across all of Eurasia, which was the very famous Silk Road. Both the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire profited greatly from this trade route, but it still begs the question, how strong was the influence of the Roman Empire in Asia, specifically when it came to trade? And also, how far beyond the Han Dynasty did their trade go? And this mystery brings us to Japan in 2016, when a group of archaeologists were doing a dig and they found some weird little pebbles. But these weren't pebbles, these were ancient Roman coins from the 3rd and 4th century AD. These coins had Constantine the Great on them. And this discovery kind of made the mystery even bigger, because now the obvious question was, how did these coins get here? Who had these ancient Roman coins, and what were they doing in Japan? Were they trading? Were they stolen? Were they a gift? Who knows? But what archaeologists were able to kind of draw from this discovery was that the ancient Romans' trade influence had roots much deeper in Asia than they initially thought. And to think that this trade route went as far as the Japanese island is pretty cool. Could you imagine being one of the archaeologists on this dig? You find it, you're very well versed in ancient Roman history, and you're like, oh my god, this is a Constantine coin, I know this. And then you go to your friends, you're like, guys, I found an artifact. You're like, oh, what'd you find? I'm like, I found ancient Roman coins. They're like, where'd you find it? And then you have to go, Japan. And then instantly everybody you're speaking to thinks that you are the dumbest person alive, only for you to then be proved as a legend for finding such a cool artifact in such a unique place. Like, imagine if your friend just went on a trip to Italy and he's like, dude, I went on an excursion and I did an archaeological dig and I found this cool ancient samurai sword. I'm sure your first thought to your friend would be, oh man, bless my friend's heart. He thought a Roman sword was a samurai sword. But then he FaceTimes you only to show you that no, he literally found a Japanese samurai sword in, you know, the Roman Empire. That's only how I can imagine this kind of conversation went. Because I definitely would assume that most archaeologists wouldn't assume that they're finding ancient Roman coins when doing a dig in Okinawa, Japan. The Tully Monster. The year is 1958, and you are an archaeologist working in the Mazon Creek fossil beds when you have just found a very interesting fossil. This fossil isn't like anything you've seen before, and it kind of looks like fossilized poo, an ancient toy, some sort of large peanut. Whatever it was, you have never seen this before, and neither have any of your archaeological or scientific friends. Not only have they not seen this before, everybody was baffled and confused on what this fossil could be. And from the year 1958 until 2016, the origins of this 6-inch long, large wood-looking, bug-looking thing had no explanation. All anybody knew was that there was a hard outer shell, 2 eyes, 2 long stalks that protruded out of the head, but beyond that, everything was up for debate. But one of the hottest debates was whether this creature was a vertebrate or an invertebrate. But that debate was closed in 2016. And I just have to say, man, 2016 was such a good year for discoveries, because I feel like so many things we've discussed on this list have been from 2016. So shout out 2016. Honestly, just a good year all around. I was in high school at the time, just carefree, you know, just having fun. I'm not one of those people that said high school was way more fun. I have a lot more fun now, I think. But high school, there's a certain charm to it. You know, you have no responsibility in life. We're off topic. In 2016, after nearly 50 years of studying this thing, it was confirmed that this wooden-looking bug was confirmed to be a 307 million year old invertebrate creature. It was labeled as a jawless fish, and it had many similarities to the lamprey. Not everything is known about this creature, obviously, and work is still being done on the fossil, but the major points of contention are, you know, case closed now. And this is an invertebrate creature that is literally 307 million years old. So crazy. Also, I find it kind of funny that the scientific name for the Tully monster is the Tully monstrum. Like, okay, you can put it in a suit. We all see through that. But in case I haven't shown any images of what artists think the Tully monstrum looked like back in the day, here are some images and renders. And I think that these look a lot better than the poo-looking fossil that was originally found. Oh, and I guess kind of a wholesome note, this creature is literally called the Tully monster because it was found by a man named Frank Tully. Look at this guy. Legend. How to survive the deadliest animal attacks. You and your best bro are sitting on the couch watching TV. It almost seemed like this day could not get any more boring. And just as you were starting to get into the show on the television, it cuts to a commercial break. It was actually a commercial for a brand new experimental zoo that had just opened in your city. And as soon as you and your bro heard zoo and brand new, both of your ears perked up. One of the most interesting things that it was advertising was a safety course on how to survive the most common and deadly animal attacks. Now, since at this point you and your bro had already survived countless deadly locations, as well as numerous deadly survival myths, you figured why not take the opportunity to now also learn about how to survive deadly animal attacks. And without any further convincing required, you and your bro quickly change into your explorer outfits and you head to the zoo. As you and your friend arrive, you notice something peculiar. The parking lot is absolutely empty, and the zoo itself is massive. And it honestly doesn't even look like a zoo. It looks more like a prison, with walls that go endlessly into the horizon. And as you walked into the zoo and met the coordinator, you were informed that the TV ad was a bit misleading, that it actually wasn't a safety course, it was more of a crash course. However, there was a cash prize to be won if the crash course was completed successfully. And since you and your bro were not only bored but broke, you figured, what did you have to lose? And with that, the coordinator led you to two massive steel doors. You and your friend walk in, and the doors slammed behind you. As you and your bro look ahead of you, you realize that this zoo is nothing like any zoo you've ever seen. There was no cages or doors or trails. It was literally just wilderness directly in front of you. Besides one table that had one pamphlet on it. And as you pick up this pamphlet, you see that it reads Animal Survival Guide. And as you begin to read it, you hear a voice over a PA system. That voice was the coordinator. And the coordinator tells you if you want to make it out of this challenge alive, you need to follow the rules in this pamphlet to a T. And they also inform you that every animal you encounter is going to be getting bigger in size as you get deeper into the enclosure. At this point, you and your bro know that you have bitten off way more than you could chew, and this was definitely not what you signed up for. But at this point, you had no other option. So you begin to walk into the wooded area. As you and your bro become fully immersed in the woods, you realize that while the circumstances may be a bit peculiar, you're in a rather beautiful location. The leaves are green, the trees are healthy, the grass is green, the flowers are plentiful, and you even notice that there is beehives and bees flying around. And while your bro decides to walk up to the flowers and approach the bees, you open the pamphlet and realize the first animal attack you have to survive is actually bees, the smallest creature in this entire zoo. And as you read through the pamphlet, you see that the first thing it emphasizes is that with bee attacks, prevention is key. Meaning that if you want to survive, or at least in this case, avoid a bee attack, the best way to do so is to be calm, slow, and gentle. And on top of that, avoid bright colors and strong perfumes. The pamphlet then goes on to state that bees typically are non-aggressive to people unless they feel threatened or are stepped on or the privacy of their nest is being encroached on. And while you are now armed with this information, you look up at your friend and are shocked. Your friend, in the bright blue jacket, wearing Axe body spray, is not only actively swatting at bees that are getting too close to him, but he is also trying to get a close look at the beehive. And it's this combination of moves that end up with him being attacked. And almost cartoonishly, you watch him run back and forth with his arms flailing until he runs so far ahead of you that you can't see him anymore. You wait for his screams to stop, you maneuver slowly around the bees, you respect their space, and seemingly magically, you're able to make it to the next area completely unscathed. However, as you meet up with your friend, you can't say the same for him, and his face looks like mine did in high school. Although fortunately, your friend is not allergic to bees. And while he's in pain, you and your friend are able to safely remove the stingers with a credit card, and you continue on your way, satisfied that you had just survived your first animal attack. One that may seem tame, although when you realize that the attacks are only going to get more dangerous from here on out, and the fact that if you did have a bee allergy, that encounter would be deadly, you realize that maybe this isn't so much of a walk in the park. As you and your bro exit the forest and enter a clearing, you notice something peculiar. It's a glass of water on a wooden stool in front of a small pond. At this point, your bro is already over the entire ordeal and just wants to get out and get his prize. And for that reason, he picks up the glass of water, pours it on his head to cool himself off, and begins to trek his way through that pond. But almost instantly, you realize that that wasn't a normal glass of water, and this wasn't a normal pond. Because sitting on top of your bro's head was a small and nearly transparent creature known as the box jellyfish. And it was actually a warning of what existed in the pond. Generally, most jellyfish are completely harmless. However, there are a few species that are very harmful, one of those specific species being the box jellyfish. Now, while you could argue that box jellyfish don't necessarily attack you, I would argue that they don't need to, because even just passively brushing against their tentacles could leave you in excruciating pain and potentially in the grave. Box jellyfish are particularly dangerous because they are so hard to see. As you and your bro did, or I guess didn't see in the glass of water, box jellyfish are almost transparent. And typically you feel their tentacles burning your skin before you actually see the jellyfish itself, making encounters with them not uncommon and not pleasant whatsoever. Now, similar to bees, the best way to avoid a jellyfish attack would be avoidance. But since that's literally the case for any animal, I'm gonna stop saying that, although it is true. As you open up the pamphlet to learn about the box jellyfish, you read that the symptoms of coming in contact with a box jellyfish range from either mild skin irritation to severe pain, nausea, and cardiac complications, and the complexity and severity of your symptoms really depend on the amount of venom you become exposed to. Now, armed with this information, you look up from the pamphlet and see that your bro is already halfway through the pond, neck deep in this water. And because of this, you ask him, "Hey, do you feel like you're touching anything in the water?" And he replies, "Yeah, I do actually. It feels like there's invisible marshmallows, but I can't feel anything." That is, until moments later when you hear your friend begin to scream in agonizing pain. You watch him run out of the pond, and standing on the other side, you see him covered from the neck down with long stripes of inflamed skin, areas that got in contact with these jellyfish. And there's still even remnants of jellyfish tentacles sitting on his skin, furthering the exposure and worsening the pain. Knowing that you too have to walk through this pond, you desperately look around for anything that could potentially help you. And it's at that point when you once again consult the pamphlet and read that one of the best ways to avoid stings is to wear a sting suit, or even a traditional wetsuit. And while you don't have access to a wetsuit, you do your very best to insulate the clothes you're wearing. You tuck your pants into your socks, your shirt into your pants, and you put your hands deeply in your pocket. And once you've become as insulated as possible, you try to quickly make your way around the edge of the pond, only going about waist deep in the water and thankfully avoiding a jellyfish attack. Although now that your friend is really looking worse for wear, you once again consult the book about potential remedies for jellyfish attacks. And while your friend is already mentally preparing for a golden shower, you inform him that the book says that fresh water and urine are actually not helpful for jellyfish stings, and they in most cases make it worse. And what you really want to use to neutralize the venom and end the pain is vinegar. Unfortunately, sitting right beside your friend was a large jug of white vinegar. And as you begin to pour it all over your bro, he instantly begins to feel better. And after the vinegar has been used up, you take your handkerchief out of your pocket, you begin to wipe off the tentacles that are still on his body. In this case, your friend was lucky enough to not require medical attention. However, in severe cases of box jellyfish stings, or where a large group of stings happen, it is advised you seek medical attention immediately, as in those cases you may require antivenom to survive. Leaving the pond and heading back to the woods, you and your friend understand that perhaps we should be a bit more careful when approaching these animals, because this obviously is not their first rodeo. And if bees and jellyfish are giving us this much of a hard time, we might not stand a chance against the real predators. Heading back into the woods, you notice once again a small clearing. Although there's no pond, there is simply a stick in the grass. And while at this point you both know better than to grab it, you do slowly approach it to see what it could be. And as you approach it, the stick turns out to be not a stick at all. And it's actually a king cobra, the longest venomous snake in the entire world. It's also a snake that carries a powerful neurotoxin that can seriously mess you up. Instinctually, you and your bro take a few steps back and you instantly consult the pamphlet. And it begins by telling you exactly how deadly and dangerous a king cobra is, and then it tells you what you should do if you encounter it. The first step it recommends is remaining absolutely dead calm. Sudden movements are the perfect way to make the cobra feel threatened and provoke an attack, something you don't want to happen. That means you cannot just run away, and you cannot try to strike it yourself. Since you are already in close proximity to the king cobra and have pissed it off by encroaching on its personal space, it may seem helpful to try to kick it to just, get it out of your way and to scare it off. But realistically, a king cobra can bite much faster than you can kick, and extending your leg towards it is only going to result in a bite that could take your life. And what the pamphlet actually recommends is to do nothing of the sort. Now that you and your bro have already separated yourselves from the snake, it's important to analyze how the snake is feeling. And with the king cobra specifically, if their hood is spread out and their body is off the ground and they are hissing loudly, that means they are peak mad. And your best bet is to create as much space as possible. If this situation was to happen in a real-world scenario, your best bet would be to retrace your steps and leave. But in this case, with you and your bro having to move forward, you have to get creative. And what you and your bro decide to do is to quickly separate and begin moving in opposite directions, almost moving in a circle around the snake. That way, you and your bro could each keep an optimal distance from the king cobra and also mitigate your chances of being bit. because realistically, the cobra can only go after one of you if it decides to strike. And fortunately, even though you and your bro accidentally made this king cobra extremely upset, you were able to pass by it successfully by remaining calm, moving slowly, and keeping your distance. And for that reason, preventing a true attack. Now, if you and your bro weren't so lucky and happened to be bit by the cobra, as the pamphlet states, the best course of action is to still remain calm, but begin taking immediate measures. And what it recommends is immobilizing the limb that was bit and keeping it at or below your heart level. Beyond just that, the pamphlet also recommends removing any tight clothing or jewelry, as your body will begin to swell, and it also recommends against cutting the wound or sucking out venom, as that has not been shown to be an effective preventative measure. Once you've immobilized your limb and removed tight clothing and are trying your best to remain calm, the final thing you must do is seek medical attention, because the neurotoxin in king cobra venom causes paralysis, and if left untreated, can paralyze your lungs, causing you to die. However, fortunately, in this case, your friend did not have a near-death experience, although you're far from out of the woods. As you and your bro stumble into the next clearing, you notice that there's no bees, no jellyfish, no venomous sticks in the grass, but you do see a small, gray, fuzzy thing. It's just sitting there in the grass, and you and your bro can't make out what it is. And at this point, knowing better than just to run up to it, you and your bro decide to yell at it to try to get its attention, because it's obviously something. And after a few shouts, you notice that this ball is moving, and it turns its head to look at you, and what you see is the most adorable puppy you've ever seen. This puppy is all sad and alone and is shaking and crying. Only moments after seeing the innocent face of this puppy, you couldn't help yourself but to go and comfort it. And as you approach this puppy and pick it up, it begins to lick you and love you, and it honestly looks like it's much happier. And for the first time so far in the zoo, you guys are actually enjoying yourselves and feel like you're catching a break. Although your precious puppy time is quickly cut short when you hear a familiar noise in the distance. It's not the bark of a dog, but the howl of a wolf. And you quickly realize that this is a wolf pup, and the pack was about to return sooner rather than later. But before you can even put the puppy down and head on your way, you notice the pack arriving. And judging by the visible ribs on their sides, they had just come back from an unsuccessful hunt. Now, in most cases, wolf attacks are extremely rare, for humans that is. Although, because you are in the wolf's territory, currently engaging with a wolf pup, the pack has no choice but to challenge you and protect their young. As you put the pup down and begin to retrace your steps, the wolves begin to close in on you, and you quickly refer to the pamphlet. And the first thing the pamphlet says is do not run if you encounter wild wolves. Running will only trigger their chase instinct, and will trigger a single wolf or an entire wolf pack to chase you down until the end. Instead, what you should do if you are in a situation where there's a wolf angry at you is to stand tall and make yourself appear as large as possible. And you do exactly that. You take off your backpacks, put them above your head, and begin shouting the most aggressive nonsense you can conjure. And quickly, with your arms in the air and your dominance being asserted, the wolves don't back off, but they do pause in their approach towards you. Consulting the book once again as you are making progress, you read that the next step is to slowly back away while keeping your eyes on the animal and maintaining your confident posture. If you turn your back to the animal or begin to crouch or slouch, this may signal weakness, once again triggering an attack. As you and your bro are standing confidently, you notice the wolf pack begin to no longer circle you and congregate around the pup in front of you, meaning that you're no longer surrounded, but you still have a pack to go through if you want to complete the challenge. And it's because of this that you continue to read the pamphlet, and it informs you that if you are not able to safely back away from wolves, your next best bet is to throw things at it. Sticks, rocks, or even your backpacks are great ways to deter escalation. And in this case, your bro throws his backpack directly at the pack, missing the wolves but startling them enough to begin backing away themselves. As you've learned from the pamphlet, wolves tend to avoid people and do not see humans as prey, and these wolves do not want to attack you. And now that they've been able to gather their pup and congregate, they are much more likely to leave than attack. And that is exactly what's happening after your bro threw his backpack. And as the wolves begin to head on their way, you throw your backpack as well, and you and your bro continue to stand strong until they are completely out of sight. And it's at that point when you collect your bags and continue walking, heading back into the woods and making your way to the next clearing, you and your bro are beginning to feel confident because you're consistently learning and successfully avoiding, or at least surviving, animal attacks. Although little did you and your bro know that the attacks to come would be far beyond just humbling. As you make your way into the next clearing, you notice that this clearing's, for once, empty. There's no sticks, there's no fuzzball, there's no bees, there's literally nothing. But upon a closer inspection, there is a pile of dirt basically right in front of you. This pile of dirt is covered in flies and honestly smells pretty gross. And while your bro thinks this might be an anthill and that the next animal attack is fire ants, you realize that what you're looking at is not an anthill, it's a pile of animal feces. And you notice beside it are prints that are large and look like paws. And putting 2 and 2 together, you realize that these feces came from a predator, and the predator is not far at all. As you crouch down to get a better look at the paw prints in the soil, your bro is quickly attacked by a mountain lion. And now the clock is ticking before your friend becomes dinner for this animal. As your friend is face down in the dirt and the mountain lion is biting into its backpack, you quickly consult the pamphlet. And the pamphlet informs you that mountain lions are stealth hunters, which is why it jumped out of the bushes to attack your friend, although they typically don't attack humans. However, in this case, the mountain lion must have thought your friend was a deer. And mountain lions are rather unique in their attack style, because not many predators try to ambush their prey like mountain lions, making them extra dangerous if you happen to get mistaken for something they're actually looking for. Regardless, time is of the essence, and right now, preventative measures or looking big is simply not an option. It is life or death for your bro, and you quickly begin shouting life-saving advice at him from the pamphlet. The first recommendation is to fight back aggressively and immediately. And instantly, your bro flips over and begins trying to drive a wedge between himself and the mountain lion via his legs. And the next thing you shout now that he is more vulnerable is to protect your head and neck and chest. These are some of the most vulnerable areas on your body that one slash from a mountain lion could easily kill you with. And for that reason, you try to keep your legs near your chest and you cover your face and neck with your forearm and elbows. And now you inform him that when the opportunity arises, strike the sensitive areas of the mountain lion, specifically the eyes and nose. And he begins to bash the nose of the mountain lion with his elbow, and as the mountain lion becomes stunned by its prey fighting back, he quickly mashes his fist on the eye of the mountain lion. As you continue to read, you see that it's crucial to fight back as aggressively as possible and to not play dead, because similar to running, playing dead will only trigger an attack response from these animals. And your best chance of surviving an attack is to resist as much as possible to prove to the animal that you are simply not worth fighting. And in the case of your bro, that is exactly what happens. The mountain lion begins to quickly back away. He gets on his knees and then on his feet, and once again, you two both assume a confident, tall stance, causing the predator to back away into the bushes that it only recently jumped out of. Recouping with your bro, you guys are both, at this point, questioning your decision, but also understanding that there is truly no heading back at this point. You quickly check your friend to make sure he's not bleeding from anywhere vital, and you continue back into the woods. You notice the ground getting marshier and the trees getting more droopy, and you realize you're heading out of the woods and into the swamp. And while you didn't expect Shrek to be one of the predators on this list, at this point, anything is possible. Although this time, it's different than before. The water is murky. There's vegetation both on the shoreline and in the water. And while you know you need to cross this body of water, you still don't know what lies within it. That is, until 2 eyes pop out of the water. And while your friend still isn't convinced it's not Shrek, you know exactly what you're looking at. It's an alligator. Alligators are no doubt terrifying, but they're also so interesting because they are literally like living dinosaurs. But on this particular day, you don't feel like getting up close and personal with a relic from the dinosaur era. As you consult the pamphlet, the first thing you see is that it's recommended that if you encounter an alligator to maintain a safe distance. And it's recommended to have at least a 20 or 30 foot gap between yourself and the alligator. And while you know you're already much closer than that and have to get closer in order to pass it, you continue reading to see if there's any additional information to survive the unlikely but possible attack. One thing you know in the pamphlet is that alligator attacks on humans are rare. Although in your case, you're getting attacked by every animal, so that doesn't mean much to you. And in the cases of alligator versus human brawls, alligators typically attack because they either felt threatened or had their nest encroached upon, or they even potentially mistook a person for prey. And while you understand that you could basically fall into any of those categories, you don't feel super confident about crossing this body of water. Your bro, with the worst luck in the world and apparently a death wish, interrupts your reading and tells you an alligator can't bite what it can't catch. And he sprints into the body of water, hoping to get through as quickly as possible. Although, unfortunately for him, he literally ran directly into the jaws of the alligator. And now you're once again yelling life-saving advice to him. One of the first things you read, once again, is that if you get into a situation with an alligator, it's best to fight back immediately. Not by trying to pry its jaws open, because you have no chance at doing that, but by, once again, targeting sensitive areas. Alligator's primary method of attack is using a powerful bite to subdue prey. So if you can strike its eyes or nose to try to have it loosen its grip, you can ideally get out of its jaws and run fast away. And that's exactly what your bro does. He begins plunging his thumbs into the eyes of the alligator, causing the alligator to open its mouth only slightly, allowing your bro to roll out of the mouth of the alligator, swim across the body of water, and run like hell away from it. And as you read the pamphlet, you see that running away from alligators is highly recommended. And it's even stated that while alligators are fast in short bursts on land, they cannot outrun humans over longer distances. Meaning that there's no need to run in a zigzag pattern, and you can run as fast as you can, as far as you can, away in a straight line. Now, as you continue to read, you see that even if you survive an alligator attack, you're not in the clear just yet. Because if one of the teeth penetrates your skin, the bacteria in the alligator's mouth could cause a nasty infection. Although fortunately for your bro, the bites didn't penetrate through the backpack or the jacket he was wearing, meaning that he was bruised up, but alive. And after your bro's scuffle with the alligator, the scaly guy decided to kick rocks and swim down the stream, leaving the body of water safe for you to cross, allowing you to once again reunite with your unlucky buddy. As you both begin to catch your breath before you head into the next section of the arena, you hear a buzzing over the PA, and then you hear the voice of the coordinator. And the coordinator says that you and your bro are doing well, and that there are only 2 challenges left before you get the large prize. That is, if you survive. But that isn't the only thing the coordinator says. The coordinator also says to you directly watching at home, if you are enjoying this video about how to survive different animal attacks and want to see a part 2, leave a like or leave a comment on the video saying part 2. And if you want to see Trust Me Bro hit 2 million subscribers, make sure to subscribe if you're not already. And with that amazing message from the coordinator out of the way, let's get to the final challenges in this rather experimental house of horrors that is this zoo. As you make your way into one of the final clearings, you see the unmistakable sight of a tiger right in front of you. Although this tiger doesn't look quite right. This tiger looks skinny, frail, and gray in the face. You can tell this tiger is elderly, and you're almost curious if the zoo ran out of budget for its predators. But as you consult the pamphlet, before you even get anywhere near the tiger, you understand why there is an old tiger specifically in this zoo. As you read, you are informed that tigers typically hunt alone and usually target medium to large sized prey, such as wild boar, deer, and other animals. And human attacks for tigers aren't as uncommon as other animals we've discussed. And the most common instances where tigers attack humans are when a tiger is old, injured, or feels threatened. And these sorts of attacks are even more common in areas where both humans and tigers live in close proximity, such as rural villages and areas like that. Now knowing why there is an elderly tiger in front of you, you take pity on your bro, hand him the pamphlet, and tell him that you're gonna take one for the team, and all you ask him to do is read you the survival tactics. Fortunately, you remember exactly how to survive a mountain lion attack. And assuming a tiger is similar, you plan on using the same moves. And to save time, you don't only approach the tiger, you also begin to just lay on the ground in a defensive position, almost to call it on to you. And as the tiger begins to approach you and then poke you with its nose, you begin waiting for your friend to give you the next steps. But as you glance over at your friend as you are covering your head, you see that he is standing there cluelessly, picking his nose, and you realize you're left to your own devices. Without having any professional advice, you decide to go with Old Reliable. And as this tiger begins to mount you and open up its mouth to show off its massive teeth, you kick Terry the tiger right in the tiger testicles and make this elderly tiger scream in pain and run away crying like a little kitten. Obviously, that's no real survival strategy, but in a pinch, it just happened to work. And as you backtrack to your friend, you rip the pamphlet out of his hand, smack him over the head with it, and continue onto the final portion of this crazy zoo's survival challenge. Heading out of the woods, once and for all, you're met with the beach and the biggest body of water you've encountered so far. At this point, you're curious how all of this has even fit in the zoo, but you're honestly too over it to even ask. Luckily, this body of water is not something you have to swim through, because there is an albeit rickety bridge going directly across it. And while it's so long you can't see the other end of it, due to the fog that is over the water, you and your bro assume that this bridge is actually what's going to take you out, because there's no animals that live on bridges. And it's for this reason that you and your bro are sprinting down this bridge to just be done with the zoo, grateful that you're actually alive. However, as you're sprinting on this bridge through the fog clears and you notice a massive gap in the bridge directly in front of you. But unfortunately, it's too late to stop and you and your bro are both dropped into the water. Luckily, it's only a short gap between the end of the bridge and the beginning of the second part of it. But during your time in this water, you understand why this bridge is here, and you have just met the final predator in this video. Because your friend is so bruised and banged up, you quickly notice that the blood from his clothes are seeping into the water. And this blood in the water is attracting nearby sharks. And before you know it, you have 2 great white sharks circling you and your bro. Now, like most people know at this point, great white sharks are not trying to hunt humans particularly, although they are curious and will give a test bite to unfamiliar things, and will give more than a test bite to things they deem to be prey. And while these sharks don't see you and your bro as food, they don't know what to make of you and decide to learn a bit more. And as one of the sharks begins to approach your bro, you quickly begin reading on what he should do. As the shark approaches your friend and he gets more and more terrified, you tell him, hey, the pamphlet says to stay calm, maintain eye contact, and avoid splashing. You cannot outswim a great white shark, and it's not even worth trying. What you should do instead is keep yourself vertical and slowly back away. And while your friend seems receptive to this information, panic got the best of him. And as the shark swam by his leg, he kicked the shark in the nose, instantly angering it, causing the great white to circle back around in preparation for a bite. Seeing what's inevitably going to happen, you continue to read and see that the book states that if you are bitten, you need to defend yourself immediately, aiming specifically for the eyes, gills, or snout, ideally with any object you have, or in the worst case, your fists. Even a small bite from a great white shark can be deadly, meaning that you have absolutely no margin for error. Feeling unconfident that your friend's going to be able to protect himself in this situation, you decide to do something rash. As the shark swim past you, while being focused on your friend, you decide to throw your backpack at the shark, giving it something to focus on. And as the shark bites on your backpack, you dive your fist deep into its gills, hoping to prove that you and your friend are not worth messing with. And fortunately, it works, and the 2 sharks swim away. But now you have no backpack. But a backpack is a small price to pay for your life. You and your bro quickly swim to the other side of the bridge and continue to walk until the bridge leads to the shore, and on the shore you see a building and a wall, similar to the wall that you approached on your way in, and 2 metal doors once again. You approach these doors and they instantly open for you, and you are met with a bright, shining light. This is what you've been waiting for. This is the room with the prize. This is everything you've wanted. And as you walk through the metal doors and walk into this very, very overwhelmingly bright room, you are met with the zoo's gift shop. And the coordinator you met previously hands both you and your bro 2 t-shirt vouchers to get a free t-shirt that says, I went to the worst zoo ever and all I got was this t-shirt. Not wanting to go home empty-handed, you and your bro collect your shirts and head home, vowing to never visit sketchy zoos ever again. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A video about how to survive some rather interesting animal attacks. And as you probably know, there's a lot more animals I could have discussed and would like to discuss. So if you want me to make a part 2 in this series, even though the bros might not appreciate it, I know you will. So if you want to see that video, leave a like or comment part 2, and I will be sure to make it for you. How would you like to be tortured? Chances are you don't want to be tortured. But just in case you did, I put together a list of the 10 most brutal torture methods ever used in human history. These are ranked from least worst to worst, in my opinion. Let's get right into it. 10. The breaking wheel. Okay, so starting off strong. The breaking wheel might sound like a fun toy, but I can guarantee you it's nothing of the sort. Originating in ancient Greece with the sole purpose of being a torture device, the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, or simply put, the wheel, was a form of public execution. The torture method was pretty simple. It was literally just a big wooden wagon wheel. There was plenty of ways this rather simple device could be used, but the most common uses of the wheel was in the Middle Ages and consisted of having the victim tied up by their hands and feet to the wheel, and then having all of their limbs broken on the wheel. Once they were beaten almost fully to death, they would then be hoisted up on a stake and left to die, which would usually happen shortly after. Other less common but kind of fun ways that the wheel were used was having the victim tied on the outside of the wheel and then rolling them down a hill, which is kind of hilarious in a morbid way. Or, less hilarious, having them swung over an open flame, giving them consistent burn exposure until the wheel caught on fire, burning the victim alive. Definitely not fun, but nowhere near as bad as what's to come. 9. The Spanish tickler. Okay, so basically Freddy Krueger claws or Wolverine hands. Just imagine those Hulk hand toys like you had when you were a kid, but instead of being like a soft glove, it's actually a metal torture device. The device itself was a long, sharp set of claws held in the torturer's hand and was used on the victim in a slow and methodical manner. The victim would be tickled across their entire bodies, sometimes down to bone, and if they didn't bleed to death on the spot, the infection that would soon appear would definitely finish them off. There's not a ton more to say about these flesh-ripping devices, besides the fact that they are debated on whether or not the Spanish tickler was actually used as a torture device. Although brutal, the Spanish tickler is still relatively tame compared to some of the other methods on this list, which is why it's only in the number 9 spot. 8. Bamboo torture. Just from hearing the name alone, where did your mind go? Did you think of people being beaten by bamboo poles? Sharp pieces of bamboo being stuck under people's nails? Maybe being stabbed with bamboo rods? Nope. Bamboo torture consists of being tied up and having planted bamboo shoots grow from the ground through your body because of how fast bamboo grows. Initially, victims would be tied up and sat over top of a bamboo plant while it was still in the ground right before it would sprout, and the plant itself would grow up through the victim's anus, through the victim's body. Now, they had to change this method because initially, a lot of victims liked it. I'm kidding, I'm not sure if anyone actually enjoyed it, but I'm sure there's at least one person that as soon as the bamboo started to make their way up there, they were like, huh. In most common practice, the victim was secured over multiple bamboo plants still in the ground right before they were going to sprout, placed in such a way where they were going to puncture vital organs such as the heart and the lungs. Bamboo grows extremely fast and can grow up to 36 inches within 24 hours, meaning that a lot of the victims of this torture were dead within a day. I think the worst part of this torture method would just be the fact that you can feel the bamboo slowly moving through your body, slowly killing you. And it's really just a fight between you and nature, a slow moving fight that you won't win. 7. Blood eagle. Okay, this one's brutal. You've been warned. The blood eagle was an ancient Viking torture method, and the blood eagle's goal was to rip the victim's ribs and lungs from their back to create almost a winged look. They would start by having the victim tied up and laid on their stomach on the ground. Once the victim was on the ground, a specific Viking with a large, sharp knife or axe would begin cutting open their back with so much force that it would actually break their ribs. The ribs would then be pulled and stretched outward like wings. The worst part is when they rip the victim's lungs out and stretch them over top of the ribs to create the complete wing look. By the time the lungs were removed, the victim was dead and covered in blood, and typically the body would then be hoisted on a stake to be displayed. Vikings were savages. 6. Filleting alive. This method is a bit straightforward, but still worth going over. The filleting alive torture method was used all around the world, but for this brief example, we're going to be focusing on the practice within medieval Europe. For a victim to be first properly filleted, they must be softened up, which typically consisted of leaving the victim out in the sun to get sunburns all over their body to promote inflammation of the skin, or the victim would simply be boiled alive. The entire purpose of the softening up process was so that the torturer could make precise incisions into the victim's body, allowing them to keep the victim alive for as long as possible. The filleting process itself would start with a long cut down the victim's thigh. But even in more rare and twisted situations, the torturer would start by cutting the face off the victim, which is the most painful part due to the amount of nerves on the face that allow for facial expression. Once the long cuts were made across the body, the worst of it began. Once the cuts were made, the knives were put away and the torturers began to pull and tear the skin off the body by hand, ripping the skin from the nerves and the muscle that lie underneath. This process would continue until the victim was truly naked. The absolute worst part is that this wouldn't kill you. If your torturer was precise and skilled enough, you could live for days after this operation. So how did this torture method end up killing the victim? Great question. The 3 most common causes of death, from most common to least common, were blood loss, infection, and hypothermia due to not having any skin to thermoregulate the body. Not fun, kids. Keep your skin on. 5. Chinese water torture. Chinese water torture is probably one of the most well-known torture methods on this entire list. It was featured in a Mythbusters episode and a few other places as well. Chinese water torture begins with having the victim lie on their back with their hands, feet, and head completely secured so that they cannot move. The victim is either in a dark room or completely blindfolded to cause sensory deprivation. Just above the victim's forehead is a bucket of icy water with a small hole in the bottom, just large enough to let water pass through, but just small enough so that the water falls at irregular intervals. This torture method may seem simple, but it is truly compounding and exponential in nature, meaning that it gets worse as time goes on. Most people, when they mention this torture method, only focus on the psychological damage which comes from it, which is severe and often cases causes loss of sanity or consciousness. But in this brief example, I want to focus on the physical aspect as well, too. It doesn't take long for the water to begin eroding the skin, slowly penetrating with each drop. A blister forms on the skin and slowly grows with each additional drip. The skin becomes raw and the water droplets become excruciating in nature. The physical pain matched with the severe mental damage makes this torture method one of the worst, in my opinion. But we still have 4 more to go. 4. Cock and ball torture. Okay, this isn't actually number 4. I just wanted to lighten the mood because this video was getting dark. Okay, back to work. 4. White room torture. White room torture is the only strictly psychological torture method on this list. But don't let the lack of physical pain fool you. This method is brutal. White room torture has been used much more in modern times by governments as a way to break an individual, typically to extract information. With one bright white light always on, in white clothes, served only white food, left with nothing but their own thoughts. No color, no noise, no stimulation of any sort. Just nothingness and your own thoughts. This extreme sensory deprivation would cause severe mental damage in only a few days' time. Some of the early symptoms include depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and even loss of consciousness. It's hard to fully grasp the full extent of the mental torment that you would experience in such a situation. But the victims who have experienced it firsthand and those who have been in prisons with white rooms have all said that those who go in are never the same if they make it out. You might be thinking, if they make it out, of course they'll make it out. Well, if insanity didn't set in and completely take over their mind, a lot of victims would attempt to take their own life to simply end the torture. 3. Swedish drink. Swedish drink, oh boy. This is probably one of the grossest torture methods on the list. This one's pretty simple, so I'll start with a bit of context. Swedish drink was brought about during the 30-year War from 1618 to 1648 in Europe and was used by Swedish mercenaries, typically on German villagers during raids, as a torture method to get civilians to talk and give the locations of the village's valuables. So what was the drink? Simply put, it's a crude mixture of human or animal feces and urine put together in a bucket. A true poop smoothie, if you will. Victims of this torture method would be held down and force-fed this awful concoction. The traumatic experience alone of being fed this horrible drink was bad enough, but it did not end there. If the mercenaries were extra evil, they would wait until the victim's stomachs would become bloated from the mixture, and then they would begin applying pressure to the victim's stomach, either by poking it with a large stick or by putting wooden boards on their stomach and walking on them. This method might seem not as bad compared to some of the other ones on this list, but the sheer grossness of this definitely made it that much worse for me. 2. Keel hauling. Yarg. Keel hauling be a pirate method o' fun. Okay, so keel hauling, like my pirate friend explained, was a pirate method of torture that involved the keel of the ship, or the bottom. The victim would have their hands or feet tied to a rope, and then they would be thrown overboard, dragged across the bottom of the boat, either from one side to the other, or from the front to the back of the ship. You might be thinking, so just hold your breath and you'll be good, right? No. Keep in mind, the waves out in the ocean are brutal, and the forces underneath the ship are incredible and can bash the victim against the boat so hard that it can kill them. If the blunt trauma and the drowning didn't kill them, keep in mind that their body would be dragged across the keel, which is the part of the boat that's under the water. And this part of the boat would be covered with sharp and hard barnacles, which would be essentially shredding their entire body as they are dragged across the boat. This method kind of has everything. Water, blunt trauma, sharp objects. It's just brutal and a true torturer's dream. I personally hate water, which is why this is number 2 for me. 1. Scapism. In my opinion, this is the worst method of torture on the entire list. Scapism, or being eaten alive. Historically, there are different ways that the scapism method could be used. One involving a barrel, one involving a boat. For this example, I will be focusing on the boat method. The boat method begins with 2 boats being nailed together to create a sort of floating coffin. The victim would be secured inside of the boats with their face exposed and their arms and legs hanging outside of the boat. So far, it doesn't sound so bad. It just sounds like we're breaking a few rules at Disney. Just wait. Next, the victim would be force-fed large amounts of milk and honey, as well as have their exposed limbs covered as well. The milk and honey would attract animals, and the excessive force feeding would cause the victim to create large amounts of feces within their own boat coffin, attracting other varmin like rats. The victim would be fed regularly, but would be left to sit helpless and exposed to all the animals and bugs that it would attract, allowing them to eat the victim slowly. Fecal matter would begin to build up, and the worms and rats would begin burrowing into your body and eating your extremities. This would truly be a horrible torture method, and for me personally, the worst part is how long this can go on for. Your body can survive in this state while being fed for days, and the longest recorded event of this had the victim living for 17 days, slowly living in their own poop and being eaten alive by bugs, creating infections, and I think dying in probably one of the most gruesome and painful ways imaginable. Like I said in the beginning, this is a personal list. So if you guys disagree, please comment down below which one you believe to be the worst torture method. And if you have some extra time, rank these 10 in your personal order in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you guys think about these torture methods. I'll try to make my next video a bit of a palate cleanse because this video got gross. Trust me, bro. Oh yeah, and this is my first video, so subscribe for more. See ya.